Go live, daddy. Go. That's what I was looking for. Go live. Hello, everyone. So I'm running a bit late this evening. Welcome to the Inglorious 6th of July, and it's been living up to its title. A, it's Thursday the 6th. B, welcome. Not that one, that's a 5. That's an 8. Don't tell me the 6 is right at the back. Yes, it is. What do you know? Sorry, if you want to know what I've been dealing with for the last few minutes, my mum told her sister that she was feeling a bit achy. She's got arthritis. It's one of the reasons why we are considering moving. Is to find a place which is all on one floor, so she doesn't have to go up and down stairs. And my aunt probably, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to put this down to not thinking it through, suggested, well, why don't you go for a holiday in a nursing home and maybe you'll be able to be okay. Maybe that'll make you feel better. For some reason that didn't go down well. Can't think why. Anyway, it turned out that my aunt doesn't realise you can go for holidays in spas and you can get massages in them. Because what my aunt thought was if Mum went for a holiday somewhere where they'd offer you daily massages, etc., and that sort of thing, that might help her with her arthritis, which it might do. But my aunt didn't realise you can get this in a spa hotel, and so thought that my mum would have to go to a nursing home for a holiday to get it. I didn't know whether to disabuse her first of her view of what nursing homes are like, or inform her that spa hotels existed, but still, that has been the last 45 minutes of my life, so I apologise I'm running a bit late. Oh, good lord. And it's an extra special birthday coming up in September. Oh, caramba. My sister thinks Drac is suspicious, and unfortunately I think she would think the same of you, Dr. Clarke. Sounds very sensible. Anyway, as such, I don't think I'm going to go for a can tonight. I think I am. I think after the last 45 minutes, I'm opening the emergency bottle of Iron Brew. Oh, right then. Hello, everyone. Let's say hello to people properly. Hello, Night Secretary. So, 2 of the British Empire's biggest defeats. Yeah, Inglorious 6th of July. It's always fun when something happens as happens so regularly on the 6th of July that, you know, you can, on one date of the year, you can go, well, the Royal Navy fought 2 major battles on the 6th of July in its history. Yes, it lost both. If in future, if you're a Royal Naval Admiral and you're going, I can fight this battle on the 6th of July or I can fight it on the 7th, you know what you need to do. Fight it on the 7th or the 5th. Avoid the 6th. Hi, John Shea. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Karl Magasberg. Hello, Abzowski. Hello, Michael Cooch. Hello, Albert Zaski. Hello, Karl Magasberg. Hello, Dunrick Einhammer. Hello, Steve Clarke. Hello, Stephen Richards. Hello, Jacob W5570. Hello, haven't seen you in a while. Probably due to time zone issues. Hello, History Vanguard. Hello, Runon. Hello, Byron Newman. Byron Newman, you're going to want to hang around to the second battle because there's no, actually it's the first battle. It's John Byron. John Byron is in the first battle, I think. Yeah, he is. Yeah, it is. He's in the first battle. Admiral John Byron is in the first battle. Hello Melanie 640. Hello DJ40. Hello Malaga. Hello Bob Fry. Hello Wayne. Hello Peter. Good evening, Dr. Clarke. Oh, in chat. So exactly how loud was the squeeing when you saw the 4.7-inch travel turrets and a travel mount, and how many frigates were sent in Drax's direction when he got there early? None were sent in his direction that he got there early. That was good for him. I'd say more in the case of we're all sitting there going, yes, the trouble is it's good you're going there, that's lovely, but that also means we're losing a cameraman for a day in Sydney. And we'd estimated Sydney to be a big job, but it was afterwards looking back, we were going, that was a massive job. And we still haven't done it all. That was lovely. No frigates and no squeeing. As John Bull, aka Gareth, will testify to, I think I went very, very quiet. Very, very quiet. And very reverent. And I managed to walk all around it. But it was interesting. I didn't realise UK nursing homes were open to tourists. I didn't either, but apparently my aunt had found out that a nursing home nearby will take people for tasters. Come and experience what a nursing home is like for a week. Again, in the nicest way, I'm not even sure if she's actually got a nursing home. I think she might have actually picked up the brochure for a spa hotel. I'm not 100% sure, okay? All I know is I just spent 45 minutes of my life trying to figure this out and broker a peace deal. And it made me get a small idea of what it is like to try and broker peace in the Middle East due to what had happened there. So, yeah. Just remember, this is my mum's elder twin sister. So, it caused that reaction, let's say, and the reaction caused a counter-reaction. And by the time I was called in by my sister, she was selling ice creams and popcorn. No, I was watching Drag yesterday. I managed to correct something wrong he said about the IJ and oxygen torpedoes. I expected anything like that to happen. It happens very rarely, but when it does, he's good about it. There are some people who are not good about being corrected. He's good. Hello, Felix. Don't worry, I was later. Yeah, I saw some of the videos Naval History of Association of Australia dropped today. I saw some of them. Teenagers, in your opinion, why did everything warlike end up on Australia? Because they are a nation of magpies. They really are. I love them dearly, but they are a nation of magpies. They let's put it this way. There are weapons. I was listening to Gareth list off weapons which were in their artillery storage in the Australian War Memorial, and he was going that you. Okay, this is John Bull, Gareth, who is absolutely brilliant when it comes to this sort of idea, this sort of stuff. And he was going, not only did you never, you never equipped with that gun, you never fought in a sector which had that gun against you. So how did that one I presume you got from a store, but how did you get hold of that one? And it was quite fun. He just basically ran around their artillery store for something like an hour going, but how's that here? And I didn't know there was enough of those left in the world, or there isn't supposed to be one of those left in the world, and when did that get here? And I've never seen that before, and it was quite fun to watch. Look, we're all being very careful about sending my aunt for an eye test because my uncle can't drive due to his eyes anymore. And my aunt doesn't like to turn her head at the moment because her neck's stiff. So she drives, but she doesn't turn her head. She turns her whole body to see when driving. And we are all waiting, and probably expecting at some point, for my aunt to also lose her license due to her eyesight. Because, believe it or not, my mum, despite the arthritis, is probably the healthiest of the three of them. And definitely the most capable of the three of them in many ways. And this is what caused half the fun this afternoon. Yeah, I'm expecting that, and I'm expecting my aunt to then, because my aunt refuses to work out how to use Uber or any of the taxi apps, and there are a few in the UK now that can. There's even an app you can get which details with a local car company, which are pretty good. Clock Tower Cars in the UK, who I use to pick me up, do my airport runs as a rule. Shameless book plug. Not called a shameless book plug because I'm going to explain why. Okay, you can have your sissy put you down. You don't need to stare in the window at me. Okay. Well, how did the corgi get here so fast? Because according to the corgi, we only need him as a small dog in the house. We don't need any other small dogs because. I'm looking in on that window. It's getting higher. Because he has more than enough chonk for all of us, all of our small dog needs. Yep. Stop staring at me like that. Stop it. It's gone. At the moment, working on a some model railway station. It's cool. Having image of Dr. Clarke brewing immediately to the kettle and running immediately to the iron brew at that point. No, none of the family. Well, Mum doesn't drink alcohol other than cherry brandy, and she saves that for very special occasions. Basically, the cherry brandy comes out if there's a birth, or if my mum's about to declare the matriarchal British middle-class lady version of war on someone. Those are the two occasions you see the cherry brandy. On the first occasion, you'll know it's the first occasion because she'll be smiling. The second occasion, if she's not smiling and grasping for the cherry brandy bottle, my actual advice is volunteer for the French Foreign Legion, minimum 6 years tour. Join the US Marines if they'll take you. Again, the 6-year tour is good. Any unit which will get you far away from the UK and involve you going to somewhere which is deeply inaccessible. Rangers in Africa, very good. If you can find a Safari Ranger role, 6 years minimum. All these, there is a common theme turning up. All those are good ones. Actually, having the image of Dr. Okay, John Shea selling ice cream popcorn. Can anyone explain what it is? Because it flew completely over my head. Basically, it means it's what you can have in a movie theater when you're watching a movie or watching the theater and you're watching a play. So the other phrase I could use was selling tickets, but you know, the dogs would never pay for tickets. They might pay for popcorn. They might. They probably just take it off you, but they might pay for it. They won't pay for tickets, definitely. I don't know. As we're talking about the tropics, how did the RN keep their sailors from cooking from the heat when serving the tropics during the age of sail? Open gun ports. Um, basically, a lot of liquid, as you usually try. Wearing barely anything. And trying to keep in the shade as much as possible. And also the cool sea breeze as much as possible. Jacob W570, 5570. Getting your elder family members to stop driving because you fear for their and other reduces is an adult task I was not prepared for. It's really difficult. It is. So far, I have managed it with 1 out of 3. One pretty much doesn't drive due to... Honestly, the most competent and capable of the 3 doesn't drive. The only one who I would actually trust driving isn't driving at the moment because of other issue. Because of basically she didn't drive during COVID and now she's worried about getting back. That's my mum. My aunt, who I love dearly, who was actually, honestly, she's driven for a long time. She's had a couple of accidents, but there again, if you've been driving for, well, as you will remember, all the women in my family are only 21. Okay? All of them are only 21. As far as we all know at their birthdays, they are 21. The last person who tried to give them a card which said anything other than 21, we've never seen again. We're not sure. Maybe they emigrated. Maybe they got a concrete coffin. We have no idea. But we've never seen them again, so they're 21. They're lovely. And it is lovely, but they are definitely... how do I put this politely? She's been driving for a long, long time. Let's say probably getting closer to 21 to 21's driving experience. Yeah, she's a accent, but I would also say that at the moment that I'm worried a bit about her eyesight and whether her things are right and whether her and the fact that she can't turn her head is worrying me as well. And it's a case of, you've checked this out with your doctor, haven't you? Yeah, he thinks it's fine. Okay. Alright. I'm going to have a conversation with Dan at a certain point about it, but, you know. Go on, Cameron. Doc, have any of the Australian museums taken advantage of some of the stable, dry environmental conditions in a place like some UK alcohols use large salt mine in the UK? Yeah, they do. They have lots of facilities for storage. Really interesting ones. Yeah. You also have to remember, my mum raised me. And I wasn't even the troublesome child as far as she was concerned. I didn't cause the trouble. The only one who used to walk in the headmaster's office and the headmaster gave her his chair. Yeah. Converse, that explains it. Yes, they all went. The nicest way, Carl. I never got them. I would love to tell you what they were like or any way, shape or form. But if cherry brandy anything enters this house, it ain't going for me. Right then. So. Dan, she lives as far away from Drac as Drac is from me, on the other side of him. So yes, she is driving, and she regularly goes in both directions. Just a heads up, if you ever see a white Volvo heading your way. uh, goodness me. Sorry. I'm a bit slow today because I've had a weird day, so I do apologise. But yeah, now I'm back more in the mentality we need for me to do this live. Sorry, that was 45 minutes, which took me completely off pat. But I didn't want to send in a message going, I'm starting this half an hour late because I need time for my brain to get back into history mode after dealing with all that. Right then. Ooh. Now I've put in a thing. Let's start off with the Battle of Grenada. I would recommend one nice spars and sorry down the 83, by the way. Yeah, I was thinking more of a Cornish spar for her birthday. We'll leave that to one side though. When I was watching on the back of videos, there are narrow gauge locos. I wonder why they're there. There are lots of those around. Second edition should be out. I know I'm hoping for a check soon because there are 3 things at the moment. Quickly, I'll go back to this. As I'm not starting this one here, that I'm sorting out at the moment. One, paying off the credit card bill from Australia because of all the books and moving them around. 2, as it happens every 6 months when you do a lot of work, you have a lot of income which comes through by means other than an employed company. I have my 6 monthly tax bill in the UK, which is fine. I just need to find the money. And well, actually, 4 things because I need to, but also I need to sort of finally sort out actually having a car, and I'm going down to a local sales room shortly, and well, this week or next week, to have a look around and go, just find something is about my base of my policy, because what I've been looking for isn't turning up, so, or at least not in my price bracket. So it's time to go see what else is out there that I like the look of, which is in my price bracket. And 4, I've got to buy some more books, which sounds strange having come back from Australia. But the next writing block, because I've got 2 books going through editing, 2 books which I'm finishing off, and then I've got 2 books which I'm about to start. And 2 books which I've sort of started off, and 2 books which I want to prep. So that's sort of my policy is the 8 books. Well, book 7 and 8, I need to start getting the books I need for, so I can go books I need to read, so I can go and track down their archive documents. It's fun. Anyway, Battle of Grenada. It's a fun battle in 1779, the Battle of Grenada. It's also a rather interesting one because, let's be honest, any battle which involves the Royal Navy losing is always going to be an interesting one. But, why is there an L appeared in here? Let me just get rid of that. Where did that L come from? That's not me. Bomb bomb. Part of the... Well, now here is the interesting thing, because I was reading a book which was written by an American author, and they put down quite clearly that the Battle of Grenada is part of the American Revolutionary War. This is despite the fact that the Americans don't fight in it, and it takes place at a place in Grenada, which is in the Caribbean. Okay. And I've got a book which is written by a two books been written by British authors, one of which puts it as part of the 1778 to 83 Anglo-French. Another one who puts it as a part of the Bourbon War. A French author who puts it as part of the Bourbon War. And a very interesting British author who basically explains it can be included on the American Revolutionary War on the grounds that that's all which started first and everything else is just joining into that. But the fact is it's the wider wars kind of take over and the American Revolutionary War becomes a sideshow in its own war, basically in its own war under this circumstance because, well, there is also the Second Anglo-Mysore War going on, which is taking part in the same period, sometimes also included in it. And that's in India, between the English East India Company and the Mysore Empire. And one of the most famous battles of this period and of the Anglo-French War is the Battle of Cuddalore, which takes place in the Bay of Bengal. Very quickly, you start to get the idea that the American Revolutionary War was happily ticking along, and then it gets subsumed into the rest of the world wars going on, and becomes part of that. And depending on whether you operate on the idea of just going chronological, so then you join them into the American Revolutionary War, or you join them into the these are all the wars going on. I'm not sure. It's interesting, let's say. I'm just going to ask the admin team to check out the latest chatter in the stream, because hello? I'm thinking spam, but just checking. The admin team might want to have a look at that. Manny said, my grandmother popped a morphine pill, went to visit a friend of hers at night. On the way back, she pulled out onto the road. Check more books. Well, I've got some books in here, which let's see what books. I got some books out from various parts of the boxes. This pretty good one. Battlecruiser Renowned, pretty much the only book about her, which is one of the reasons which caused interesting fun with the whole video on Renown because people are going, there's nothing new in this video, and you're going, well, that's because I did it off secondary sources because I put it together quickly. And this is pretty much the only book which is on the Battle Lisa in English. Anyway, so the Battle of Grenada. The point is, all these wars are going on. So Grenada is part of the Caribbean campaign. It's one section of a wider war. You're either going to think, okay, the Caribbean is part of the American Revolution War, and actually you can link this quite easily into the American Revolution War because the events here have a direct consequence for operations in the Americas, in North America. But also it is part of a wider conflict in that the British are also positioned and the French are also fighting in the Channel. There's the Western Squadron is doing its thing. There are various things happening in the Mediterranean, in the Indian Ocean, as you can see with the Battle of Cuddalore. So the big thing about these battles, and I want to talk about this with both of them, is that both are part of a world war. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the traditional definition of a world war is something akin to a total war, but involving multiple countries around the world and fighting all over in those theatres. Okay, well that's sort of a problem, because total war requires a level of national industrialization to be in effect. It requires a level of government control, which is impractical to achieve in earlier times. And honestly, it requires multiple countries. It requires the organizations of all the countries involved to be similarly balanced in their organization and effectiveness internally. There's a problem with all that. We're talking about a period where we are dealing with nascent countries in many regards. Yes, some countries are established and have been around for a while, but even the ones which have been around for a while have not necessarily developed in the same uniform fashion or at the same level of capability. And let's be honest, one of the countries in this one, France, will in a very short time, after achieving some very great victories and actually doing really quite well, will self-immolate itself down to the point at which it'll become a military dictatorship, followed by very bloody wars against pretty much everyone under the sun in the world, and eventually get itself humiliatingly defeated several times, because it basically cannot sustain what it's asking itself to do, especially after it's killed off all the people it spent generations trained to actually run the things. And that's a small issue you have when you have a nobility-based system and you don't have an education to widen out. This is the thing. You can get rid of nobility. You can. As a methodology of running a country and providing personnel for key points in your national organizations. However, you can only do that if you have a sustained level of education enough that you can pass on the cultural and, to an extent, institutional memory by means other than familial experience and familial exposure. Because that's what you're basically looking at. That's what a nobility system does. It's providing the cadre of leadership personnel who get experience and training thanks to familial exposure, because you do not have an education or promotional or ability-based promotion system to provide it any other way. It's a very cheap system and requires minimal organization by you, the state. It relies entirely on people's and familial self-interest, i.e., if you want a good example, let's go to Game of Thrones. That's usually a fairly decent example to give to people because a lot of people have watched it these days or have read it. Several things which come up especially through certain Lannisters, the whole thing is about family. Lannisters epitomise this. They don't care what happens to an individual generation. They are constantly about promoting the whole wider family. About them all getting the experience so they're all capable at doing their jobs. And as Manley says, as soon as you decide to start purging ability without such replacements, you soon find that it's not so easy to replace them. Now, the point that we also have going on, and one of the reasons why I have a video coming up on a navigation axe, and to get to that I'm going to quickly, do this, because these have got a navigation axe I've got coming up as a video on the 27th of July. I know it's not sexy. I know battles tend to do far better for viewership figures and far better for recruiting new viewers, etc. But navigation acts, talking about them as they develop and as they thread up. 1660, 1663, 1673, 1696, 1733, and 1764. And I know the last one is the sugar tax and various other things, but they're, broadly speaking, we'll include them under the navigation acts heading. These are not just things to do with control of trade. They're also about building and developing a bureaucracy, building and developing an institutional memory of civil service, which is a really interesting thing, and a process of government. Not great necessarily for the 13 colonies, really doesn't make them happy, but for the wider government, in terms of British government, it teaches them things. And it lets them learn. Now, we also have, by the way, on the 10th of August, Forgotten Battles, St. Matthew and the Yellow Sea. I thought you enjoyed those ones. And then we had the British capture of Trimcommely on the 31st of August. And yeah. There will be, at some point in October and November, there will be a filming trip. I don't know. That is what we have going on. And all these things have been a factor in the development of the Navy. And in terms of the Royal Navy actually was never really had the same noble basis that the Army, or certainly ever wider parts of British forces, actually did. One of the reasons of Britain being a nation of shopkeepers and merchants, which distressed Napoleon greatly, as after all he was a military officer, an artillery officer. He was of good breeding. Well, the thing was, that had meant that was where Britain grew its ability to build a fleet from. Its ability to understand the fleet and grow its fleet. And the experienced personnel the whole way up were sailors. They were sailors. Yes, you had a period where you had sailing masters, etc. But as the Navy was developed and professionalised, especially post the War of the Three Kingdoms, aka the sometimes known as the English Civil War, but considering the Scots and the Irish get involved, I think that's rather a limiting phraseology for it. Let's just call it the British Civil War. The Navy that comes into being post-parliamentary control, with infused with the royal understanding and knowledge, and to extent some of the work of James, who would become eventually James II, who was not a bad Lord High Admiral from an administration perspective, and Pepys and all those things, is a Navy which is very good at retaining and growing institutional memory. And one of the things that is important to look at in these terms of battles is the Royal Navy suffers these battles, but then you look at it and go, well, what happens? The Royal Navy loses an issue, something gets lost in the far distant parts of the world, but instead of the Royal Navy scrambling to fill in and go, ah, we're panicking, they're going, hang on, no, what's important? What's important is the Western Squadron. If we lose in Grenada, that's terrible. If we lose out there, that's annoying. But what if we lose back in the Channel? That is game over. So very quickly, you have a level of strategy and inbuilt industrial focus and infrastructure focus being developed. Justin Craig's outside London this time. And there is the Polish and Hungarian model where 6 or 7% of the population counts on ability, even owning land only enough for a balcony of geraniums. Fun times. I'm glad I'm on the living room TV, Colin Cameron. If you'd said I was on the bedroom television, that'd worry me a bit. D-Turn, hello. Hello to Germany. I haven't heard about the new submarine, but yeah, that'll probably get added onto one of our trips one of these days for shipshape. Navigation acts sound interesting. They are interesting, but they're not exact. They're not exciting. They're interesting. They're not exciting. Good idea. Also, you can have a robust education system that still ends up shooting yourself in the let's go afoot. Yeah, you can, especially if certain topics get ignored. One of the big things I have problems with is I believe in a balanced education system, as did most of the people in this period, in that you should have a grounding in what we would now call STEM and the humanities. You need both to ground you as a person. You have too much of one or the other. You can produce some very good specialists, but as a wider population, you need a lot of people who are able to see both sides of the coin. Because it's... How do I put this? Where I see STEM and humanities sometimes, I sit there and go, well, imagine you have a dragon on each shoulder. A pet dragon on each shoulder. If you constantly feed one and ignore the other, you'll end up lopsided. You'll end up thinking, doing everything, thinking about that dragon on that side, because it's the big heavy weight on your shoulder. It's going to cover all your judgment, all your thinking. And the moment you encounter someone who has only fed the dragon on the other side, you're going to be unable to understand him in any way, shape, or form. Whereas if you feed, let's say whichever one is your favourite dragon, you do feed that more than the other, but you still feed the other dragon, you end up with a slightly more balanced shape. So when you meet someone who's done the opposite, you still have enough common ground and point in the middle to actually meet and understand each other. That's my theory, anyway. Listen, losing a Culloden-class third-rate ship line is an inconvenience. It is. Oh, yeah, at some point, I think, while I was in Australia, I hit 10,000 subscribers. I think. Actually, I think it was in 10,000. I think it was while I was in Australia. But it was a couple of weeks ago. Or a week or so ago. Hang on, it was a week or so ago. I only got back last Tuesday. Oh, good lord. Sorry. Just don't meddle in their affairs, so your country and taste good will catch up. Anyway, so the run-up to Grenada is rather an interesting one, as again, because this basically tells you, again, it gives you a good example of how campaigns can have a wider impact. Because this is a campaign in the Caribbean. And actually starts off with the British capturing St. Lucia. The British capture St. Lucia in 1778. And they use it primarily to monitor the activity in a major French Caribbean base, the Martinique. So they capture a French territory to monitor the principal French territory. Okay? So the British are on the up and up. Both sides are getting constant reinforcements. So this means there's a lot of changes in their numbers. They're going up and down. As ships go home, ships come up. One of the problems that the Royal Navy has is they have a shortage of frigates. Why? Because they need a lot of frigates for doing the war action off the coast of America. Combine that with the Western Squadron and various other inshore squadrons taking up a large number of frigates, and needing frigates in the Indian Ocean, Mediterranean, and everywhere else in the world, and frigates sailing independently as well as acting as convoy escorts, and suddenly the Royal Navy is forever in a want of frigates. And when I say forever in a want of frigates, I mean forever in a want of frigates. They really are. It was definitely this Friday 2 weeks ago. Yes, I think I was in Australia. I think I was in Australia, yeah. When I hit 10,000. Thank you. I need to somehow get to 15,000 so that my mum wins the Christmas bet this year. Thank you, Auntie. The same aunt that did the suggestion today and caused the 45 minutes of fun. Ay, caramba. So, this means you have a constant flow and ebb and change in numbers, which means there is some really bad intelligence going on. I mean, really bad intelligence going on. Both the French and the British have very little idea, really, of the realistic numbers on each side. Now, this causes a problem, because the Royal Navy have to go off to escort a convoy. And the French get another set of reinforcements, and then they go on a revenge tour. I don't know if you get anything for 10,000 subscribers for YouTube. I think it's 100,000 subscribers. No, you don't get anything for 10k. It's 100k. Oh, no. So, this causes fun. But the French decide to go on a revenge tour, and the French have a very good admiral. A very, very good admiral. They do have a very good admiral. We'll be talking more about him in a second. His first target he was really interested in was Jamaica, but the win was difficult. So he goes and takes St. Vincent. Captures that on the 18th of June, 1779. After that, he attempts again to go for Jamaica, but the wind is making this difficult. Again, it's the lovely divine wind. It keeps interfering. It's the beautiful thing when someone starts telling me, you know what we really need? We need kites to pull merchant ships around the world. And I go, Okay, so we've done that. We have done that. Believe it or not, we've done some things with those sort of things. They used to be called sails. There's a small issue in that the wind doesn't usually go in the directions you want to go, and sometimes doesn't work at all. But it's an idea. Let's put that up on the whiteboard, and we'll circle back to it if we don't find anything better. I'm trying to say, keep circling back to it. There's got to be better options out there somewhere. Anyway, so Grenada's captured on the 4th of July. Yeah, it happened on the 4th of July. And when the British have got their convoy away, they turn around and go, right then, what are the French up to? The French fleet is here. Yeah, I know the French fleet is there. First of all, they start heading towards St. Vincent. Then they hear they're at Grenada, and they go, right, we'll go to Grenada. And so, the Royal Navy turns up at Grenada. Well, before we get into that, and this is one of the reasons why this battle becomes kind of very interesting, the French Admiral, Vice Admiral Charles Henry Hector Comte d'Estaing, really, really smart, really good admiral. Worthwhile looking up if you want to find a good French admiral, and one of the people who'd been a real problem to fight for the Royal Navy. He actually even joked when he's being executed that if they sent his head to England, they might well fetch a decent price for it. He is executed under the Reign of Terror because, well, he had the temerity to testify in favour of Marie Antoinette at her trial. Let's be honest, let's consider it under the scenario that was going on in France in that period. That in 1793, during the Reign of Terror, he testifies in favour of Marie Antoinette. He'd been promoted to admiral's rank by the National Assembly, and he'd supported their liberal reforms but stayed loyal to the royal family. And they produced letters which had passed between him and the Queen, where he had said he would strive his utmost to see that she was okay. So he was brought to trial, charged with being a reactionary, and was sent to the guillotine on 20th April 1794. And as I mentioned, his execution actually says, after my head falls off, send it to the English, they'll pay a good deal for it. Now, the thing is, his wife and his only child had already died as well, so frankly the man didn't really have much to tie him to the world. But you've just killed who is probably your best admiral because he decided to do something out of honour rather than out of necessary sense. That wasn't really smart, and let's be honest, when he dies, age 64, considering the age of Howe and others in their final battles, I think, that there is a chance. Here's the thing, if he'd still been alive 10 years later, Napoleon could have used the Estaing. The Comte d'Estaing, Napoleon would have made quite a lot of use of him. The British Admiral is John Byron, aka Foulweather Jack. Let's see. He took part in George Anson's sail around the world. Although his ship only made it to South Chile, where it was wrecked. He'd been governor of Newfoundland. He circumnavigated the world himself as a commodore. He fought battles in 7 Years' War and American Revolution. He seems to frequently encounter bad weather and wreck ships in his career. He managed to reach Vice Admiral the White before he died in 1786. His grandsons include, of course, the poet Lord Byron and the Admiral George Anson Byron, who was actually 7th. They were the 6th and 7th Admirals Byron, respectively. Yeah. And he's buried at the Church of St. Mary the Virgin in Twickenham, which I don't think is too far from St. Mary's University College, where I did my bachelor's. An interesting history, certainly. He'd won the Battle of Restingouche, which was in the French and Indian War in 1760. But there again, he had 3 ships of the line, 2 frigates versus a frigate and 5 merchant ships. It's not really much of a battle. This battle, well, the Battle of Grenada, he is the commander-in-chief of the station, so he's in charge. Hello, Jellicoe. Colin Cameron, he could probably have crossed the channel and got a fleet. If D'Estaing had shown up in the United Kingdom and said, I wish to switch allegiances away from France, the Royal Navy would probably have... They might have given him... They'd have given him a squadron, but they probably wouldn't have given him a fleet. He'd have been second in command of a squadron until they were sure of his loyalties. However, he could have gone to Russia and got a fleet. More than likely. He could have gone to lots of places and got a fleet. The Royal Navy, they'd probably go, nice way, we've got enough of our own admirals wandering around. We don't really need to take you on. We would take you on if we're the only option. If you either come to us or you go back home to France, we'll take you. But they'd probably prefer to give them to the Russians, something like that. Now, there had been a lot of interesting things going on here, and you have to remember, at one point there had been both Admiral William Hotham and Admiral Samuel Barrington out in the Caribbean, and it's when they had a large fleet there, they had captured St. Lucia. And actually defeated D'Estaing at the Battle of St. Lucia. You know, they'd stopped his attempted relief. So, basically, it's one of those often scenarios. This is a enabling theatre, which enables the other primary theatres. And as such, it gets what it can. And in this scenario, it has some good ships, but the trouble is it doesn't really have enough of them. D'Estaing had also hoped to aim for Barbados as well, but he managed to fail for that one. Jamaica, Barbados, you know, go for them all. Now, the thing was, the fleets are theoretically not that disparately matched. you could say, because it's 24 ships of the line and 2 frigates versus 21 ships of the line and 1 frigate. But the trouble is, it's when you start looking at those particular sections of them. Now, I'll add, you have a vessel like the Fiat Rodriguez, which was actually a 50-gun privateer, letter of marque, under Chevalier de Montaut, that was escorting a convoy, and the French fleet has gone, we'd like you, so we'll take you. So that provides half the gun, and honestly, one of the probably the one of the 2 ship advantages for the centre force under the Stang. You have the Tonon, 80 gun, second rate. Zele, Magnifique, Fier, Protector, 74s. Fantastique and Provence, 64s. A 16 gun advantage over the British van, which was made up of 74s, Suffolk, Royal Oak, Prince of Wales, and Magnifique. And the third rate Boyne and Trident, and Trident 70 guns, Trident 64 and Medway 60. Now, one of the things to notice here is that technically Byron has a lot more admirals wandering around. He has 4 of them. He has 2 rear admirals, and including himself, 2 vice admirals, with 21 ships of the line and 1 frigate. Whereas poor old D'Estaing has, well, he has Chief d'Escadre Jean-Joseph de Raphael de Provence, who there is an argument as to when exactly he is promoted to Contre-Admiral, which is Rear Admiral, and whether or not he's actually doing this as some sort of Commodore. And there is the lovely Lieutenant General Pierre-Claude Harnoux de Bragun, who is technically an army officer. But, you know, don't let that get involved in anything. Now, the real advantages of the fleet come in the, as you can see, in the centre, where whilst having a second-rate Landoch, which is technically got 10 guns less, that's 5 guns less on broadside than the Princess Royal. Let's be honest, if it's an 80 versus a 90 gun ship, that's pretty much academic. Third rates, Fondant 74s, Fondant, Hector, Robustier, Guerrier, versus Fame, Sultan, Albion, and Elizabeth. Okay, so they balance each other out. 64s, well, Artisan and Valiant versus Nonsuch and Stirling Castle. 250s, good old 4th rates. I think there's a question about 4th rate 50s in the Patreon vote, once again. Fiat Rodrigo, that vessel which was taken up from trade, from letter of marque, and Sagittaire. And then the rear, 8 vessels versus 7. 74s, Diadem, Marcel, Caesar, and Hannibal. Against Conqueror, Cornwall, and Grafton. Okay, so there's one less 74 going on there. 64s, Sphinx, Vengia, and Reflik versus Yarmouth, Lion, Vigilant, and Monmouth. Oh, we have one more 64. And then a 50-gun vessel, the Amphion, on the French side. 60 guns, 1 ship advantage. And the French have 2 frigates for sending their signals back and forwards. The British have 1 frigate. If you're sitting there looking at this going, Alex, that looks like a rather hodgepodge force on both sides, you would not be wrong. The fact is, both have been getting ships as they can from their home ports and sending them home as they need to. So both fleets are, to an extent, it's one interesting thing is that the British fleet is in many ways slightly more homogeneous, in that pretty much it's all third rates. There's one second rate, but all the rest are third rates. Variations on third rates, I do admit, from everything from 60 to 70. Well, 60 to 74. But still, third rates. But the French fleet, well, they have 2 second rates, don't they? They do have 2. So you could sort of sit there and go, well, what's their advantage here in fleets? Well, they got 2 second rates. They've got 3 fourth rates. And they've got 3 more ships. In total. Now, you couldn't say all those 3 ships, more ships, are 50-gun ships. But this is one of the interesting things about the fourth rates, because whilst it's not going to probably feature in the ships of the line in a battle, if you're talking about a battle in the Mediterranean or a battle in the home, sort of the Western Squadron or those sort of fleets, a 50-gun ship of the line is still a powerful warship. A fourth rate is still a very viable and powerful warship out in places like the Caribbean or in India, in the Indian Ocean, because if you have one and your opponent doesn't, if there's an extra ship, that's extra ship of the line. It's an extra 2-ducker. Where did Nonsuch come from? Nonsuch is named for a palace which Henry VIII maintained not far from me. Nonsuch Park still exists in the UK. And that's... you can look that up. I actually used to be, long time ago, when I was a borough councillor, I was one of the serving members of the council on the Nonsuch Park board, because it's a shared board with Sutton Council, because the park really sort of, because of the way it features into wanders into Cheam area, and they're basically run as one park in practice. It goes across. Dan, don't put it in sunshine. You'll be very careful. Trust me, there is a whole argument over Yule versus Cheam on that one. Or Nonsuch ward, as we have in Epsom Mule. With fleets being at sea so long, even with suffering from man pressure, in the fever islands for so long, not particularly. Mostly because there's been a rotation of ships, and there's a constant rotation of ships. This is the point I was trying to make earlier. There are ships going home and ships staying out, and usually they have hospitals. They establish hospitals in their bases they do their best to try and keep the fevers down to a minimum and all these things on the ship. So it's managed as well as it can be, and the rotation of the ships means that whilst there is an impact, it's not a massive impact or anything that's really worth really talking about. It's not a scenario where I can tell you, well, one of these fleets is completely ravaged by disease and the other one isn't. No. And you could turn around and go to me, well, Alex, the advantage of these things is 176 guns. They've got 176 guns more than this one have, so you can start going, right, and well, what's the advantage then? Well, that's pretty much 250, two fourth rates and a second rate. You can argue that's their advantage. Their firepower advantage is equivalent to two fourth rates and a second rate. That's enough firepower to help them do what they need to do. Anything else to talk about with the fleet? They're interesting ships. Tonnant is especially something which always attracts my attention because it's 1743. So, theoretically, by the time we get to this battle, which is taking place in 1779, the Tonnant
of 1743 is 36 years old. Yeah. And that gives you a real idea of how long these ships are viable for. It had been the flagship of Louis XV's fleet. It had served at the Second Battle of Cape Finisterre in 1747. It had participated in the Battle of Quiberon Bay. And it finished its career in 1780. So, if you think about it, it finished it pretty much. It finished its career on a high. It had served in 2 losses. It had survived the French, but it had what goes out on the Battle of Grenada, which is a victory. Exactly, Cody 85. 3 more ships also means 3 potential double teamings. And if you also consider some of the other details about the ships, well, if we go through the French ships, they lose quite a lot of senior officers. Provence, which is one of the 64s in the Vanguard, its captain, Victor Louis Deschamels de Chambrossin, is killed. And he is replaced in command by Joseph Francois Felix Garnier de Saint-Antoine, who goes on to do some fairly decent, interesting things. For the Fia Rodriguez, Captain Montaut is killed, the 50-gun vessel in the centre line. In the Escadra Bleu, the rear, they lose. Well, Captain Ferrand de Coenga of the Amphion is killed, but Captain Charles Pico de Dampierre of the Diadem is actually wounded in action. So is Captain Jean-Baptiste de Moraes de Castellet of César, which was the flagship for the rear squadron. Captain Jean-Giorgio du Cosson de Retz is wounded in action of the Vengeur. Captain Armand Francois Sillet de Seville is wounded in action of the Refelici. And Chef d'Escadre, Toussaint Guillemin Piquet de Lemoux of the Annibal is also wounded, I think. Although not that badly. Chef d'Escadre is an interesting sort of scenario. Because sorry. Just it's sort of like a Commodore, but not a Commodore, if that makes sense. It's closer to a Commodore, and pretty much there are 2 Chef d'Escadres in the rear squadron, in the Escadra Bleu, but one of those is just acting as a ship's captain. So basically, it's almost a senior captain rank. They might be used as called divisional captains in Royal Navy parlance. Ay, caramba. I'm still getting my head over the noise from earlier. So, the battle. Well, the battle is rather as one would expect. The French... I don't know, my sister thinks you have some sort of fake accent. I wish. Tell her mine is a Surrey accent, which is tinged with the fact that my family is half Cornish and half Scottish. So I use a lot of Cornish and Scottish phraseology and syntax while speaking with a sorry accent, which makes me weird in British terms. But if she'd like me, if you would prefer, I can go into the full posh accent, which I had to talk at school, because this is how we had to speak at my school. So I can talk the whole time like this, like a true British gentleman. Which, you know, it's fine. This tends to be the accent I use when I am going into formal places, and when I am talking to formal people in a formal way, and I want to be clearly and clarity understood. However, it is not my true accent. It is just the one I have learnt. My normal accent's down here, basically. And hello to your sister, 9681. So, the French. They anchored off St. George's Town. Roughly southwest of the island, but it's sort of southwest-ish from memory, where they anchored. And the British approached during the night. Interesting thing, the British decided not to come up fast and not to attack during the night because they're worried about basically shoals, but also Byron was being... How do I put this? Byron was being a bit conservative. And yeah, the Stang had been reinforced. Ten, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. Yes. It's rather interesting. On my notes, they keep talking about Keep talking about there being a debate as to whether there's 25 or 24 ships aligned there for the French. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. I don't know. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. Yeah. I don't think I'm missing one from my list of ships, so I've got 24 names of ships line. If I am missing one, I apologise now. They're a good squad. The British are fairly decent ships, there's just not enough of them. And that's one of the interesting things here. There's the way Byron does command the battle, because the Stang weighs anchor at roughly 0400 hours and forms his ships into a line of battle in order of speed. So this means they're not actually lined up in terms of their normal sailing order. They are lined up in order of speed. Now, this actually gives the advantage to the French because it kind of hides their strength from the British. And he orders them to head roughly northward. And so as each ship leaves the anchorage in turn, you just see one ship. You don't see any of the organisation or bunching up or clustering of stuff that normally you would see with a larger fleet getting organised. So Byron actually thinks his fleet is superior. So Byron, instead of forming up line of battle, gives the order for general chase. You're gonna guess what happens. I'm glad your sister is watching what you're watching and taking care of United 6th, everyone. It's always good to have someone who cares. Hello, Ronan. It's as the French fleet is now sort of seeing up in front of him, he's in general chase, that Byron realizes, oh sugar, I've frigated up quite dramatically. And tries to reform a battle line. As a result, about half the fleet form a battle line, and half are still in general chase. This leads to Fame, Lion, and which other two ships? I think it's Monmouth and Grafton, but I'm not 100% sure. I think it is Fame, Lion, Monmouth, and Grafton, but I'm not 100% sure on Monmouth's inclusion. It could have been Magnificent. I've just got M as my notes and the question mark. So obviously, all I've been able to find out is the question mark. So if anyone knows better, please do. But they did paint this rather nice picture of the battle, which does kind of give you an idea of the fact that one side's trying to form up in line and is forming up, and one side is in a line, and the other side is running straight at them. The line is a crushing thing when you are silly with it. Lion has to basically turn herself downwind and actually heads for Jamaica to avoid capture. The wind's finally shifted. That would allow a manoeuvre to Jamaica for the French. The British lost roughly 183 killed and 346 wounded. The French lost 190 killed and 759 wounded. But the British are beaten off. So it's one of those things where the French lose a lot more people, but the British are broken up. And to an extent, the most important person who's broken up is Byron. Byron is, well, theoretically, Byron had the weather gauge, but Byron gives it up by ordering general chase when he believes he has superior numbers to attack D'Estaing. And D'Estaing is, of course, forming up line and does it in such a way as, oh, sugar. Now, one of the interesting things that comes from this is there's two problems, really. Byron is, as you can see, has been outsmarted, but basically, how do I put it politely? He resigns his post, returns to England, and whilst he's briefly made Commander-in-Chief of North American Station from the 1st of October 1779, he never actually seems to go out there, and he's made a Vice Admiral of the White in September 1780, but honestly, he might as well be on the yellow list because he never really goes anywhere else, never serves again. He's broken by this battle. He had already been quite severely injured during the storm on the way to the West Indies. And, yeah. Language, Cody 85. In contrast, D'Estaing's not much better, honestly. They don't lose any. The French don't lose any ships. They don't. They don't even have a ship run off to Jamaica, as Lion does. D'Estaing goes to Grenada, returns to Grenada to make repairs after battle. Byron goes to St. Kitts to do the same. But D'Estaing doesn't launch any further attacks in the West Indies on the various fleet operations. You could say this is because he's realised that he can't pull the same trick twice. And that Byron would probably get reinforced. But Byron resigns in August and returns home in August. So there are weeks measured between the time he's in charge and the time he goes home. And, well, for D'Estaing, the battle has a very interesting opportunity. Consequences are the Siege of Savannah. Now, why does that come in here? Where is the Siege of Savannah? Well, if you were interested in going look at the Siege of Savannah, you'll find quite a large number of the troops and forces that turn up, and the naval units that turn up that are there from the side that attacks the battle are made up of the French. And, yeah. It's a rather interesting scenario because 16th September to 18th October 1779, D'Estaing turns up. He brings troops, either detachments for full battalions or various things in between, from the Regiment de Champagne, the Regiment d'Assaut, the Regiment d'Argenat, the Regiment de Cambrai, the Regiment de Hainaut. Why do I have a notification going off? Turn it off. The Regiment de Feu, the Regiment de Dillon, the French-Irish regiment, the Regiment de Walsh, another French-Irish regiment, the Regiment du Camp, Saint-Dominique Colonial Regiment, Regiment de la Martinique, again, from the Martinique Colonial Regiment, the Regiment de la Guadeloupe, the Guadeloupe Colonial Regiment, and the Regiment du Port-au-Prince, again, from Colonial Saint-Dominique, and the Regiment de Metz, which is, of course, an artillery regiment. That's quite a large and important formation turning up when you consider the vast majority of the forces in the battle. Well, there are several companies of militia on the American side, from the American forces, which are not. Let's put it this way. Please don't get me wrong. The militia does not mean necessarily bad troops. Okay? Quite a large number of the American militia had prior service and experience and fought in various wars, and some would say even surviving in America this time is fairly good training for surviving on a battlefield. But there is a difference between. There is a time that is taken for a militia unit to reach full military standards, even for that time period, versus a regular unit. Good luck, Steve Richards. Enjoy walking the fluff. The trouble is, whilst they turn up, they don't win the battle for the Americans. They don't win the battle for the Americans. And one interesting thing is it does turn into a British victory at the Savannah at this point. One of the other interesting things, consequence for it is, of course, the Haitian revolution in Haiti, but also the fact that siege of Savannah, Casimir Pulaski, the Polish noble count who basically created the American cavalry doctrine, and was a key part of setting up a lot of the U.S. armed forces for the revolution, is killed. And it's rather interesting to note that there's a rather large number of interesting troops from Saint Dominique involved in the battle. No, Byron was not aboard the Lion. Byron was aboard, what was his flagship name? Princess Royal. The other British flagships were the Prince of Wales, the Suffolk, and the Conqueror. You know, Conqueror is commanded by Rear Admiral Hyde Parker. Again, this is another thing which is worthwhile considering for Byron and this battle. He has Vice Admiral Samuel Barrington as his second in command and in charge of the van. He has Joshua Rowley as a second in command of the van in Suffolk. He has Rear Admiral Hyde Parker in charge of the rear and the Conqueror. In the nicest way, he has a fairly solid fleet if he'd been in a line of battle, instead of just throwing caution wind and going into general chase mode before he was even sure of how big an enemy he was facing. He could well have won that battle, because whilst he is technically outnumbered, he would technically have also had the weather gauge, and he had enough experienced officers there. He could have reacted and manoeuvred. I don't think there's ever been an HMS Wardrobe. I don't think even a landing ship in World War II has been named HMS Wardrobe. So, consequences of the loss of Grenada? Well, that's the siege of Savannah, which doesn't necessarily work out that well. So, now we're on to the first Battle of Algeciras, which takes part in the War of the Second Coalition, theoretically. Please note I'm saying theoretically, okay? There is a reason I'm saying theoretically, because things get interesting in this battle and in that period, because it takes place on the 6th of July, 1801. But for some reason, whenever I type it in, they also include this battle, the Battle of the Nile, in the War of the Second Coalition. When the Battle of the Nile takes place, and you can read it to be sure, actually, in 1798, well, in August 1798, which, according to my calendar, comes before November. I think it does. Let's move that a bit. Just a tad. That's better. Mm-hmm. Anyway, with the US military units, the more civilized area they came from, the worse they did. Depends which areas you're talking about. But yeah, there are some interesting scenarios. Because it also depends usually on the quality of recruits. Some of the ones which came from the theoretically more civilized areas were far more interestingly recruited than some of the ones which came from the less civilized areas. The wars of coalition do not get overlooked because, in nice way, they're often grouped together as the Revolutionary Wars or the Napoleonic Wars, and so they get quite a lot of attention. It's just they get. How do I put this? People play fast and loose with the dates so often it's beyond belief. Actually working out which coalition is which point and which organisation is in doing what is sometimes interesting because different accounts will date it from different things. They just will. They really do. Ooh. I've just been invited out to dinner. Not tonight. Not tonight, but, you know. That's nice. It's always nice to get invited out to dinner. I have, by the way, if anyone's asking, I have 4,009 to go to get to 15,000. So, the first Battle of Algeciras. Now, what people usually find interesting about this is that when I start telling them, well, the Algeciras has had quite a lot of battles named for it. Most of them are sieges, but there are a couple of naval battles. There really are. And there's a reason for this. Algeciras is here. Yeah, that's Gibraltar on one side of the bay. The other side of the bay is Algeciras. So, yeah, that can be a pretty interesting place to be. It can be a very, very interesting place to be. There's been sieges of Algeciras in 1278, 1309, 1342 to 1344, and 1369. The battles of Algeciras, well, of course, there's one which took place in 1278, a naval battle, but we're talking about today the first of the two battles that take place in 1801. Battle 1 is a loss for the British. Battle 2 is a loss for the Franco-Spanish forces. Ba-da-da-da, ding, da, do, do, do. And yay, now my notes are working. Sorry. My notes decided not to work for them. Well, basically, it's called Algeciras or Gibraltar depending on which side of the bay it takes place on. If it's this side of basically the rose in the middle, the compass rose, it's Algeciras. If it's this side, it's Gibraltar. It works. Now, there are some really interesting things which happen in this battle. Because mostly you can say, well, you should actually say there are actually three fleets fighting. There is the Royal Navy, there is the French Navy, and there are the Rocks. Well, let's do this the whole way and check that I am pronouncing it correctly. So, turn that back on.
pronouncenames.com.
Algeciras.
Algeciras. Yeah, I think.
Algeciras.
Yeah, I think I'm pronouncing it kind of right. Algeciras. Rocks always win. Rocks do always win. They do. They always win. They're kind of cruel that way. They have no feeling for anyone else. Ooh! I just received a notification which you will all find kind of cool. A book titled Battle Cruisers by Ronald Bassett is on its way to me, published in 1981. I've been trying to hunt a copy for that for years. Also, while I'm actually here, I'd like to point out that, I remember this, both Peter C. Smith and Ronald Bassett agree with me. It's Battle Cruiser, 2 words. 2 words. Not 1, 2 words. I know. I didn't take it as you saying I was wrong, Melanie640. I took it as I better check that I'm pronouncing it correctly, and I was emphasizing the G far too much. It's Algeciras, not Algeciras. So I was getting it slightly wrong. But actually, Algeciras sounds even more like that news service than Algeciras. That reminds me, I should check you with Michael Clarke. Anyway. Cool. Oh, by the way, if any of you are interested, there is a book just flashed up in my thing, which is on my system, which is called A Lady in Waiting: The Complete Journals of Court and Private Life in the Time of Queen Charlotte, by the person who put it together is Charlotte Louise Pampendieck, who was one of her ladies in waiting. Always interesting to hear that. Yeah, I've been trying to get a solid copy for years. Not a which probably sounds strange, but I've been trying to get an actual proper copy. As in a hard copy book for years, rather than a Kindle version, because I prefer the actual proper copies are easier for me to work from. Right, so this battle has all sorts of interesting connotations, because if it goes wrongly, theoretically you could end up with another Siege of Gibraltar going on, but actually they don't really have the forces to do a Siege of Gibraltar again. If I'm not mistaken, the heart on a mobile chat is basically just allows you to, it's one of your emoji options. Ooh. Well, 96831. I didn't think this was going to be a particularly long video tonight, or long live, in terms of topics, and I was going to put a Q&A at the end, using a new system of engaging audiences, a question and answer session thing you can turn at the end. So maybe we'll get to some of your Brewship's questions tonight, before I move on to Discord. Okay? So,
It's port opposite Gibraltar. Should be an area where the Royal Navy is particularly strong, right? Well, small issue. They have a lot of fleets wandering around. But this time they do have a fairly decent admiral there. Let's be honest. Rear Admiral James Saumarez, 1st Baron de Saumarez, who would live 11th of March 1757 to 9th of October 1836. And the French have Contre Admiral Charles Lenoir, 17th of January 1761 to 2nd of December 1848. They are not, how do I put this politely? They're not bad officers, either of them, really. Lenoir is dedicated. He had fought already at the action during the action of 7th of May 1794, the Battle of Goire, the expedition to Ireland, he'll fight in the first and second Battle of Algeciras. And then, why is there 100 flying up my screen for some reason? Then, again, there's another 100 that keeps flying up my screen. And then he also, in the Napoleonic Wars, he of course is in charge of the expedition to the Indian Ocean. And there's the Battle of Pulaura, the Battle of Vizagapatam, and the action of 13th of March 1806. And he also does the invasion of Guadeloupe. So they're okay admirals, both of them, you know. Saumarez, well, let's be honest, he's taking part in the 4th Anglo-Dutch War. He will actually hold commands of the Channel Island Station, the Baltic Fleet, and the Plymouth Station. Took part in the Battle of Dogger Bank, the Battle of Saints in the American Revolutionary War. Took part in the Battle of Goire, the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, the Battle of Nile, the first and second battles of Algeciras. And, yeah. Is a perfectly sensible commander. The 100 is my fault, I guess. Hey! That's no one's fault. It's just, I was wondering why you were just appearing, and I was going, what? Well, there's 100. It's coming from somewhere. So, they are both decent commanders. We have, and either one is going to make a massive error. Let's put it this way. They might not be... Let's put it this way. Neither of them would be officers I would call for... how to put this politely? Neither of them would be officers I would call for a special daring elan, something pulling a rabbit out of the hat. But neither would be officers I wouldn't trust to be able to do their job, even under the weirdest of circumstances, as I would expect a competent officer to do. I'd expect them to find the competent option for a problem, rather than maybe the innovative or out-of-the-box solution for it. So here are the fleets formations. Right then. In this one, the Royal Navy has Caesar, 80 gun, 3rd rate to this point. Please note that by this point, between 1799 and 1779, 80 gun vessels have shifted from being 2nd rate to being 3rd rate. And so Caesar, Pompey, 74, Spencer, 74, Venerable, 74, Hannibal, 74, Audacious, 74, Calpe, 14, Brig, and Louisa, which is a ship which has been hired. Literally, in order to get more signal ships, and wouldn't Byron have loved this option, Saumarez has hired a vessel and put it under command of Lieutenant William Truscott, the Louisa.
Ouch, Melanie. Right, so competent but not inspired. Yes. The French formation. Formidable. 80 gun. With the Admiral and Captain Leonard Lalonde aboard. Deza, 74 gun, with Captain Christie de la Palliere aboard. And Indomptable, 74, with Captain Augustus Moncuso aboard. What you might have noticed is the fleets have standardised tremendously. Cost for the injection pen is 31,600. Yowza. Is all I can say, Melanie. Yowza is all I can say. If the name ends in Mab, it's made from recombinant DNA from a mouse. Actually, probably a Chinese hamster. Anyway. So. Anyone who has ideas for helping Melanie, please put them in the chat. I'm specifically looking at Dan in here as the medical amongst us. Ouch, every 4 weeks? Melanie, that's just getting worse. That's a lot of money. So, on the face of things, you have 3 third rates on the French side versus, well, 6 third rates on the British side. And whilst the French have a Fort Murion, a 5th rate 40 gun vessel, and the British only have 2 brigs, let's be honest, that means that the Royal Navy basically lines up with the 4 French ships of line versus 4 of their third rates, and then goes, ooh, we've got 2 more, we can double up. It does. Oh, oh, good lord. This is why it's nice having the chat going. Why I put the premieres out when I'm off wandering, so people can still have the chat. So, let's consider the battle, shall we? Now, what happens is that the French and various forces are, well, they're planning on forming up. They are putting together various squadrons. They are trying to maximize their force and, more importantly, maximize their capabilities. I think it's Cadiz, but yes. They're basically, they are trying to get as many of their ships together as possible. In fact, Lenoir is under orders to join with the French and Spanish fleet at Cadiz and take possession of the vessels there. And with the combined fleet, it's planned to take 1,500 soldiers under General Pierre Deveau to launch operations against the British, to develop an attack on Lisbon or Egypt. Basically, he was able to do whatever he wanted. And he managed to leave Toulon without any resistance, because the British blockading squadron wasn't there. He managed to pass the Mediterranean coast without any problems. He managed to pass Gibraltar. Unfortunately, at that point, Lenoir then meets Lord Cochrane. Always a good one to meet. Who had been captured when his brig, HMS Speedy, had not proved speedy enough. And Cochrane informed Lenoir there is a powerful squadron of 7 ships of the line stationed off Cadiz under Sir James Saumarez. At which point, Lenoir looks at his 3 ships and goes, 4 ships, I suppose, because he's got a 40 gun with him. Goes, I don't think we can make it, boys. I don't think we can make it. And says, right, well, so we're gonna go and anchor in Algeciras, the fortified coastal town there, and wait and work out what we're going to do. The trouble is, as we mentioned, Algeciras is the other side of the bay from Gibraltar. And believe it or not, you don't need to have a blockading squadron to watch Algeciras from Gibraltar. You can stand up in any of the lookout points in Gibraltar and see everything that's going on in Algeciras. Similarly, in Algeciras, you can get a fairly good idea what's going on in Gibraltar. The bay is not that big. It really isn't that big. So, this means that HMS Culp, which is under George Dundas, who's a name you should know from the Aegis Sail of the Royal Navy, spots the French squadron, and so sends word to Saumarez, who's off Cadiz. Now, unfortunately, Saumarez had dispatched HMS Superb under Richard Goodwin Keats off the duty on the mouth of the Guadalquivir River along with the brig HMS Palsy. They'd gone off there. They'd been sent off there to pretty much watch what was going on, because Saumarez was worried the Spanish were up to something. Saumarez is always worried the Spanish were up to something, but Saumarez was being particularly paranoid at this point. It's just the same HMS Caesar which went off and did her own thing. If you're talking about, in this battle, as previously mentioned, I think it is the same Caesar which went off and did her own thing. Actually, might not have been. No, this is a newer Caesar. This is a 1793 HMS Caesar. So this is a successor to the Caesar who went off and did her own thing. Actually, I'm not sure. No, I think she is a different ship. I think she is a different ship. So, gotta make sure I get back to my notes. Now, Samaras decides that, frankly, he wants to get to Gibraltar as quickly as possible. And whilst he sends a frigate HMS Thames to recall Keats, Keats, i.e. in Superb, managed to pick up an accurate report, a report from an American merchant ship, that Linois had already sailed from Algeciras. And believing that the French would have therefore have turned for Toulon, and he'd be too late to catch them and wouldn't be of service, he returned to his station to watch the Spanish at Cadiz, and actually took Pasley and Thames with him, i.e. the frigate and the brig with him, so that he could better make an impression on the force inside Cadiz that their fleet was still in the offing off Cadiz. This is not necessarily a bad idea, but he is basing this all on the word of American merchant vessel. Keats is actually a fairly good naval officer, and in the second battle of Algeciras will do a very, very good job. But I would also not rate him that high on the ability to tell when someone's telling him Porky scale. Now, Samaras sailed eastwards towards Algeciras against the wind, and as he was taking his time getting there, Linois managed to augment the defences of Algeciras, which were already, I can't think why, considering the history of what's happened in this area, were already formidable. I cannot think why the Spanish had quite formidable defences on that side of the bay. Anyone have any reason for why the Spanish might have strong defences on that side of the bay? Please put them in the chat, because I am completely at sea on the idea of why they would. He put his flagship Formidable on the northern edge, followed by Dessau and Indomitable to the south, each moored roughly 500 yards, 460 metres apart. Murion is stationed in shallower water to the south of Indomitable. They had 11 large Spanish gunboats on the northern extremity of the harbour. And they also had fortifications at the Battery de San Iago and Torre de Almirante. The southern approach to the harbour was covered by 3 gunboats and the batteries at Fort Santa Garcia and Torre de Villavega on the shore. And there was also the fortified island of Isla Verde, which mounted 7 heavy cannon and which lay between Indomitable and Murion. There were also distant forts that could land shells in the anchorage, and there are many, many shoals and rocks which make it very difficult to navigate for unfamiliar sailors. Renan, thanks, Ogda. Then from indicative UK indicative NHS prices, £3,346.09 per dose. Yowza. Either there is a huge markup going on for someone, or because I don't think that equates to what Melanie was looking up earlier, or someone is gouging someone. Micro job creation scheme for construction workers. That could be a reason for building stuff. Malga, maybe local laws just like castles. Yes. Don't know how. Sand castle contests that got really out of hand. Always a possibility. Cody 85. Also, they needed to protect the harbour from rabid mermaids which roam the area. More than likely. Remember, pre-existing contract, most likely. Contracts rarely get cancelled. Even need for workers no longer existing. Oh, yeah. Londi, the exchange rate is not that bad. No, if the exchange rate was that good, from pounds to dollars, in a nicest way, I would be doing a tour of America. I could afford to go on a tour of America for a few weeks. Because, considering what the exchange rate would be there for making, it would be absolutely amazing what I could do. And I certainly can't do a self-trip to America at the moment. So, Samaras, there is one small issue with him. He doesn't really understand the word patience. In fact, patience is probably something which happens to other people. When things go really, really wrong. I won't be coming with Drac later this year. I don't have the economics or the free time at the moment. At the moment, he says. Because it depends. If I suddenly jumped up to 100,000 subscribers and I could therefore get rid of at least one of my lecturing jobs and probably tell another of my occasional jobs to go and wander itself, I'd suddenly have a lot more free time for writing and everything. But I doubt that's going to happen anytime soon. I'm trying to clearly keep Barbary pirate slaving activities in check in the area. That could well be it. So, Samaras basically decides the moment he arrives at 0700 hours on 6th of July, before he even gets there, he's already told his squadron to have their small boats ready to launch in readiness to act when required. Now, there are spectators lining up on both the Spanish and Gibraltar shorelines at this point. And this is one of the things I find interesting. Basically, they see everyone coming, and there are people already have been out watching. And when they see them, they go, there's going to be a battle! There's going to be a battle! Let's go watch! They're so used to battles in this area, it's their sport! He put HMS Venerable under the command of Captain Samuel Hood at this point. Now, this is later Vice Admiral Samuel Hood, who is the son of Admiral Samuel Hood, first cousin. He had been sponsored to join the fleet by his, I suppose, uncle once removed or something like that. He's a very experienced officer anyway. And it's not a bad choice to put in charge, because in the front line, because frankly, he is gonna be aggressive. He was also the officer who had the most experience in the waters, and so his vessel is the first to enter the bay around Cabrita Point. However, the moment they enter the bay, the wind drops, and Hood, and of course Venerable, his ship, are becalmed. This means that the first ship to actually engage any target is HMS Pompey under Charles Sterling, which is engaged from the battery on Cabrita Point. She entered the bay at 0750 hours and was followed by HMS Audacious under Captain Shuldham Peard. Now, when Linois spotted the British entering the bay, as you can see, what does he do? If you look at this map, he orders his sailors to move his ships into shallower waters. So they are moved into the shallow waters along the shoreline. And the sailors and the soldiers and the personnel they have aboard were dispatched to actually assist the Spanish gun batteries around the bay. So they were reinforcing the defences. The French ships joined in the fire as Pompey and Audacious came within range. First, actually, it was Murion, the fourth rate 50-gun, the fourth rate vessel. No, fifth rate 40-gun vessel, to open fire. And then the ships of the line started joining in as well. Now, at this point, Samaras is actually 3 nautical miles behind where really Pompey and Audacious are. But Sterling presses the attack. He's the senior captain that's in there and under fire, and he's pressing the attack. And this, again, shows another problem. What's happened in both these cases? Both times the fleet's been let to get out of control. The Admiral has decided to basically go charging in because it seems sensible in the first place to get there, deal with the problem as quickly as possible. And he's gone charging in. The trouble is the fleet's got away from him. No, he's not the Samuel Hood that the Valkyries have been named for, no. Now, they passed close to the Isle of Verda at 0830 hours and managed to start to engage the French ships themselves in turn. They anchored next to Formidable at 0845 hours and opened fire at very close range because, again, this is Samaras and the Royal Navy. Now, the light winds further out in the bay meant that Venerable and Audacious weren't able to enter that action till roughly 0850 hours. Venerable decided engaging with Dessau and Formidable, and Audacious focusing on Indomitable. Both, by this point, had anchored at long range, which was against Samaras' orders, but, you know, that's life. They found a spot where they could anchor, where they were fairly sure of the waters. There are sometimes you can go, well, you know, these captains are being very scaredy cat. Well, they're not scared of the French fire. They are scared of the rocks underneath the water and the fact they're going to destroy their ships with them. They're going to be proven right by that in the history of this battle. Now, the French and Spanish both tried to get out a heavy cannonade against the ships. And the engagement goes on with Formidable for about half an hour. But Formidable then ceases firing for a short while and tries to warp herself further inshore. And then Pompey gets caught by a fresh current, which swung it so it was facing Formidable's broadside, so it's bow on, which allowed the French vessel to rake the Pompey. At this point, Dundas comes in Calpe, because he takes his small vessel, his little brig, remember, inshore to engage the Spanish batteries firing on a squadron, and also attack the Murion at close range. Murion was undercrewed, still powerful enough to drive off the 18-gun brig, because it has a 9-gun broadside versus a 40-gun ship, which is a 20-gun broadside. And even if they're only manning 18 of those guns, they're still twice as many guns as you have. But anyway, by 09:15 hours, the full British squadron had arrived, and HMS Caesar has led them in. At 09:20 hours, HMS Hannibal joins the action ahead of Caesar, which left only HMS Spencer, which is under Captain Henry Darby, unengaged at this point. He'd been becalmed south of the Isle of Erda and come under heavy fire from batteries and positions there, some of which had been firing that rather lovely thing, if you're in a wooden ship, of hot shot. Hot shot, of course, is designed to start fires in your timbers and tends to make captains rather annoyed. It starts off by making them scared because they're having to deal with it, but then it makes them annoyed. And really, that is a captain you don't want to let get close to you after you've fired hot shot at them, because, I'm thinking away, it's a war-winning tactic. If, however, he manages to get close to you after you've fired those things on him, he will tend to resort to massive amounts of violence. At this point, the flag captain, always nice to have one of those. Always good to have a flag captain a flag captain, and this is, of course, is Jahil Abaton. It's a rather interesting name when you think about it, Jahil Abaton. And when you consider he's born in Rhode Island, British North America. So, you know, it's an interesting name. Ends up a vice admiral. Anyway, he suggests to Samaras that perhaps they can negotiate with the Spanish to hand over the French ships. Samaras doesn't think this very likely. In fact, tells them he doesn't think it's likely. In very short and sharp terms. But they still remain on good conversation. And basically also adds that he doesn't think the battle's gone on long enough or done enough damage for the Spanish to think it worthwhile. Basically, if a few more shells, well, a few more balls, etc., and damage hits Algeciras, perhaps the Spanish will start agreeing to that. But until a lot more damage has been done, the Spanish are going to be happy to keep on fighting. Now, before you think this is unusual, this is, of course, the Bay of Gibraltar and that sort of area, in which case, whilst there are sieges and big battles, there is also quite an ongoing level of conversation which goes on at the whole time. It's one of those scenarios where there is always an undercurrent of conversation going on between the two sides, even when officially there isn't. And so there's always channels which can be approached through. It's a rather unique area where that is actually possible. Now at this point, at roughly 10:15 or 10:15 hours, Samaras sends orders to Hannibal, that's Captain Ferris, to manoeuvre his ship closer inshore to attack Formidable more effectively. The phrase, "go and rake the French admiral," was probably used, but that might be a polite, watered-down version of what was probably said. So, Ferris began sailing slowly northwards, using I would say, politely light winds, but possibly also currents, to try to move ahead, with the aim of then tacking back towards Formidable. Unfortunately, he grounds at 1100 hours as he passes the Torre de Almante. And whilst from this position he's able to use his broadside to fire at Formidable, and to fire some of his broadside other guns at the Spanish shore defences, but he's very, very vulnerable at this point to fire from the shore, and this is where Hannibal is going to come a cropper. Because Hannibal's now isolated, it's a nice way of putting it, at the northern end of the British line. Caught between a crossfire of the Formidable, the Spanish shore batteries, and those gunboats. Remember when I mentioned those gunboats earlier? And she's unable to manoeuvre. Ferris tries to signal to Samaraz of his ship's precarious position, but his signal halyards have been torn away, and it's sometime before it's realised what kind of conundrum he's got himself into, B, before they try and work out what they can do to assist him, and C, before they launch it. But they did try and launch. They sent several ships' boats to attempt to tow Hannibal off the shoal. The pinnace from Caesar was actually lost in the process. She was struck by a cannonball. The pinnace was. At this point, Hannibal's basically left stranded as the sea breeze disappears and none of the other British ships can come to the assistance of her. There is, though, a light breeze from the land breeze from the northwest. That's what it's basically called. When it's from the sea, it's called a sea breeze. When it comes from the land, especially when you're inshore and littorals, it's the land breeze. So it's basically, when they talk about land breeze, they're talking about something which is coming from the shore, so blowing you away from shore. And, well, whilst this theoretically favoured the French squadron, Lenoir tried to order his ships to sever their anchor cables and use the breeze to manoeuvre into a stronger defensive positions closer inshore. Only Formidable really completed this manoeuvre. Neither Indomitable nor Desire could be brought back under control in time, and both ground. So basically, he's just grounded 2/3 of his, 50% of his fleet, basically. The Sacs grounded directly in front of Algeciras, and Indomitable northeast of the Isle of Erda, with her bow facing out to the sea. Samaraz then responds by basically deciding he's going to take Caesar in himself, and cuts his cables and manages to wear around and past the becalmed still Audacious and Venerable, takes up station off Indomitable's bow, and basically pummels the ship. It's Samaraz, it's what you expect him to do. Audacious followed the flagship, unmistakably probably going, hang on, we're becalmed, yet they've just gone past us. Frigate, we're becalmed because we're being idiots, let's sort this out. Quickly, move off, let's go. And so they did. Now, at this point, Caesar and Audacious are both exposed to fire from the Isle of Erda, the batteries, the land batteries there, and those batteries and quite a lot of the other batteries are now being crewed quite heavily by French sailors who had been evacuated from their, well, let's put it this way, dispatched from their ships because their ships are grounded, and frankly, the French admiral is not stupid. Now, at this point, Audacious becomes, which had been becalmed, with the sacks off the bow, and out of that particular ship's fire, well, she managed to turn herself using her ship's boats, so that she could engage the Audacious. So the Audacious turned to engage the sacks using her ship's boats. Sorry, making sure I say that clearly. Ship's boats. So basically, they'd been becalmed. They'd been stopped and gone, we can't hit that target. This is the problem when you don't have a turreted weapon. You can't point. You have to point the ship. So they'd actually lowered the boats, crewed the boats, used the boats to turn the ship so it can start firing. Now, at this point, Spencer and Venerable are ordered to join the attack, but they're not able to because there's no wind. And Venerable actually loses its mizzen topmast to French shot as Hood tries to maneuver his ship. Basically, they're all getting shot at by the land batteries, and they can't do anything about it. In fact, they've been so massively damaged by this point that Hood felt he was no longer able to maneuver in a fitful breeze, and so he just pulled his ship out. He basically, to get his ship within range, he has to use all sorts of tricks, including boats. So, to an extent, we've now got ships of the line being towed around by their boats, like in a version of galley warfare. At this point, both Pompey and Hannibal are under heavy fire from Formidable, and they are taking quite severe damage. The situation on Hannibal was pretty much hopeless. Casualties were mounting, main mizzenmast was shot away, she was firmly grounded. Pompey was in a better position. The rigging was in tatters, but masts held and the ship was afloat, although becalmed. Now, this is one of the things that tends to happen in these battles. There's a dispute over Pompey because at one point her colours are shot away and the French claim this is her surrendering. But the colours are quickly raised again on another point. And so it's kind of like saying, the nicest way for it to be a surrender, they have to be down, and then down long enough you can send a vessel to take a ship's surrender. If they're down, they're not down long enough because they're being raised up again, immediately starting work to raise them again, so they're still fighting, then they're not surrendering. At 11:30 hours, with no longer able to really contribute to the battle, Samaras ordered the remainder of the squadron to send their boats to tow Pompey out of danger. Some of these boats were again sunk, but the fact is they did manage to get Pompey out of danger. Unfortunately, using the boats for this mission meant that he couldn't do an amphibious assault or anything against the Isla Verde with the Marines he had aboard, and it would have been a Marine and sailor assault. And with Caesar and Audacious starting to drift close to the shoals around the island, if they grounded, they would be more vessels sharing Hannibal's fate, and Hannibal was lost. By this point, they realised Hannibal was lost. Samaras decides to call it quits. He withdraws his ships to Gibraltar at 13:35 hours. And the thing is, again, you can withdraw to Gibraltar without being considered a coward. That is an advantage, this scenario.
Okay, he's been defeated, but he's been defeated by the shoals, and he can claim it quite happily. Pompey was already being towed in that direction. Caesar and Dacius were able to cut their anchors and limp out of the bay with the assistance of a nice land breeze. And Venable and Spencer joined up with them, and the squadron retired to Gibraltar, leaving Hannibal grounded in Algeciras harbour. Now, at this point, Captain Ferris orders all survivors below decks to escape the worst of the fire as the Spanish and French guns focus on him as the only remaining target. And it's only at 1400 hours that he orders the colours struck. At this point, French and Spanish soldiers storm the ship. And there is then a rather gruesome thing in that a number of wounded men are apparently trampled to death, according to the surgeon, as the boarding parties sought to extinguish fires. Now, at this point, there is a bit of an issue, because there might have been a misunderstanding, but it might have also been a little bit of a ploy, because Hannibal's ensign is then rehoisted upside down, which is the signal to distress. And Captain Dundas decided to try and help, because he thought this meant that either Ferris was still holding out on Hannibal and requesting support to salvage his ship or to be evacuated before surrendering. So boats were sent from Gibraltar with carpenters from the dockyard to try and do repairs. And Dundas took HMS Clarke back into the bay to provide assistance. They withdrew once their error was realised. Although, again, more boats were seized by the French as their crews boarded the Hannibal. So, yeah, there's a... maybe it was a mistake, maybe it's a ploy. Certainly worked out well for the French, either way you look at it. Consequences. Well, the victory is great for the French. Unfortunately, it leads quite quickly to the second battle. And the second battle is, how do I put this politely? Not so good for the French. Although, interesting enough, the second battle of Algeciras, the French and Spanish fleet is far larger, and they have some first rates and second rates along, because they are joined by Vice Admiral Moreno. And they have all sorts of vessels there. But they don't do that well. Because the second battle goes more to Samaraz's plan. Both these battles are often used as demonstrations of why it's bad when an admiral loses control of a fleet. It's not. Neither of them are. Both of them are demonstrations of why it's bad when you don't have good intelligence. Would having HMS Superb there have helped? Might have been useful to have an extra ship and an extra senior officer there, but not really much. The extra frigate might have come in handy, in terms of being able to cover the boats manoeuvring about, etc.
But really, what would have been helpful? Well, if we look at what turns up at the second battle, they have HMS Thames, they have Carlotta, which is a Portuguese frigate. There, so they have 2 frigates, a 32, a 48, and 2 brigs. They have all those extra assistants. They have Caesar, Superb, Spencer, Venerable, Audacious as their, they're 5 third rates. Because basically, some of the ships are just Pompey is just too damaged, and of course Hannibal's being lost by the British. But that squadron of 5 third rates, 2 frigates and 2 brigs manages to deter, manipulate, win a battle in terms of the second battle of Algeciras against 2 first rates, which are blown up. The Rio Carlos and the San Fernando are both blown up with roughly 1,700 killed between them. The San Fernando, Argonauta, San Agustin, the second and those third rates don't get engaged, but the Formidable gets heavily damaged of France. The Desax is not engaged, and the Indomitable not engaged in this fight, but the Saint Antoine is captured and becomes the HMS San Antonio. The Santa Sabrina frigate is lightly damaged, and the various other vessels involved, frigates and luggers, are also not engaged. It's a case of, in both battles, it's a case of intelligence. You need the information. Having Superb there would have been useful. Having Thames there would have been really useful. And it's interesting enough that the second action is a night action. Okay, that's one of the reasons why it's pictured so dark there, because they're fighting at night. It's Superb, which does quite a lot of the how to put this, the damage to the enemy fleet. Alright, let's answer some questions. Actually, no, you've been doing Morrowind wiring, so I thought you were having fun with doing that, or something, because you said earlier you were building a station. In respects of heated shot, there must be a shoe plug of wood to stop the ball from igniting the powder. How does it have to be? How big does it have to be, and how much does it affect accuracy? I'm honestly going to say there are different methodologies used for different cannons, and each one can have their own effect. Okay? Heated shot is an entire video in and of itself. So I'm going to sort of avoid that question, but I'm going to say it all has an effect on accuracy, but if you're firing enough of them, it doesn't have enough effect on accuracy. The gunboats weren't paddle powered. They were. Well, they could be. Let's put it this way: they could be sail powered, or they could be. Let's oar it. There's also the trouble of trying to scuttle a. How do you scuttle a wooden ship? Because wood floats. It's not like metal. Metal sinks. Wood floats. The only way that you can really scuttle a vessel like that is to blow her sky high, and she's got no boats on, so no one can go anywhere, and you're basically going to be committing suicide. Most people don't want to do that. I am going to do some Discord tonight, but I'm also going to do a Q&A on here, because let's start. See if this works.
I have no idea, but there is now a Q&A. Should be working. I'm not sure if this is telling you if this is telling anyone anything, if it's working, but it's supposed to be. So show me questions. So if you add questions, so I can basically, the thing is that means that there's a separate section which shows up which shows people's questions. Hey, it does work. And the first question is from 9681. If Coastal Command starts World War II in 42 with Sunderland and its replacement, the short Seaford, under development, how likely is the Sunderland production ramps up while the Seaford is in development? Honestly, they did ramp up Sunderland production, but it's only so fast. It's only going to get so much effort, because especially if you're starting in 42. You're going to have more Sunderlands in service, but you're probably going to be slightly further along. You might even have the short Seaford already created by that point in 42. The thing is, Coastal Command, I don't see them getting any real more greater slice of the pie in between 1939 and 42 if they don't get in the situation they're in. Because you have to remember, the problem for Coastal Command is they require large aircraft. And so does Bomber Command. And Bomber Command is always going to come first. And whilst the RAF, and well, rather the Air Ministry, might be happy to cut try and limit naval procurement in order to try and get the Fighter Command built up, they're not going to cut Bomber Command to build up Coastal Command. And even then, they were told that they would get a year where they could do that. Basically, the Fleet Air Arm would have been back out able to order its stuff quite happily from about mid to late 1940 onwards. It does show up differently. It shows in a second one. You mentioned Hotshot. How about the hollow shot film monumental? Are you aware of the usage of that stuff? Yes, but that's another of the variations of various types of heated shot. That's a sensible question. We can always hope it is. But basically, no. I now have multiple sections I can open up. So I can have this open, which is quite cool. And I can see what else I can do. So I've got a questions section open up, and I've got two screens. As a sensible, I have double screens. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I've now got a live chat and a question chat. So if people asking me questions on the question chat, I'm not sure how you do that separate. I've got both a live chat and a question chat shut. Let's see if I can do a print screen and show this all to you. Cool. So if I do that and I add source image and I go to pictures, screenshots. Yeah. There you go. I've now got this. That's cool. I wonder, I can probably use this for next brew ships or things like that. It could make things very easy because it means I can both see the chat and I can see people's questions, and they're separate. Okay. Yes, I am on Discord soon. Oh, good. I can't seem to get the queue function to work, but you just put a chat in the queue function. Marion, does the RN benefit from the heavy frigate, e.g. Constitution design, if they beat the nascent US Navy to the punch? Or is it an awkward enough to design to not be worth it? It doesn't really fill the same hole for the Royal Navy. If they need something bigger than a frigate, they've got third rates. If they really want, they've got a few Razes wandering around. They don't need the heavy frigate. The heavy frigate is something you build when you haven't got enough ships of the line and you're not going to get funding for enough. So you need the heavy frigate because you need the firepower. But if the British meet a heavy frigate, they send in a fourth rate, or they a 50-gun ship of the line, or they send in a third rate, and then you'll soon find the heavy frigate goes, you know what? I'm not built to fight you. I can beat up any frigate, but I can't beat up you. And that's ultimately the problem for the heavy frigate. It's very powerful at beating up other frigates. It's not capable of taking on a ship of the line. And the moment it's kind of like it's the heavy cruiser known as the Deutschland class, aka what are sometimes called pocket battleships conundrum. You give them 11-inch guns, that's great, but they are basically a heavy cruiser, and they don't have the armor to really deal with a heavy cruiser or even a light cruiser because of the treaty system. But if we take it on further than that, their problem is they can't win. They can't win because if they go to fight, I don't know, this can sound right. If they go to fight, let's say they go to fight they go to fight anything. If someone turns up with a battle cruiser, they are snookered. If someone turns up with a battleship, they are snookered. They cannot fight the larger ships. No matter what they do, they cannot win that fight. I have had another idea. Can I do desktop capture? That's desktop 2. There you go. Right then. Oh, hello. Desktop 2. You can see what I'm seeing in terms of the questions when they come through. So that's the problem. The heavy frigate's a cool thing to have, but it's not really useful for any of the larger fleets. For small fleets, it's a great thing to have because it gives you an ace in the hole to use to deal with other people's frigates when they turn up. But the trouble is, if you're too successful with them, as the Americans found out, if you're too successful with them, what happens is the larger fleet just goes into its reserves and goes, right then, activate that third rate, 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 that third rate. Go, have fun. It's round. If you're given 100 million quid and you were told to make a naval museum, what would you employ? What topic of naval history would you feature, and where would the base be? 100 million pounds. Now, whilst I would love to build a ship and, build a whole warship that, sit in water and you could actually... With 100 million pounds, what I would probably do is I would take the idea from Yeovilton. But instead of building a carrier flight deck, I would build a museum, which is basically a giant warehouse and has the insides of various ships. So it'd have rooms built up like the boiler spaces and the engine spaces, etc. So you could slowly walk through them. And because they're built inside a warehouse, they could be that you could have them divide up in such a way that people in wheelchairs, etc., can get round. That you can get groups around them with ease. You can walk through the space and you can see them, get an idea, but you can walk through it. And I'd basically do an entire museum, which is basically ships from the inside. So you see the turrets, so you go inside. Maybe, you can see bits of it outside as well, walk around them as well as walk inside them and those sort of things. So you might have one turret which you can see the inside of, which you go inside and walk through because it's been blown up in terms of spread apart and broken up onto one different side, or some way, or maybe that way. And another one which is complete and you can stand outside and have a look at it and see how big it will be. That sort of thing. I think it'd be quite cool, but I think you could do it at 100 million. Or at least you can make a start. Sounds similar to the Titanic Museum. Sounds similar to the Titanic Museum. To an extent, I can imagine it will be. I don't think bots can get out of the question stream without the mods being able to see and intervene. No, can we expect Malaga? I can see your first question. I'm not sure. I don't know. This is the first time I've ever used a Q&A system, so we'll see how it goes. Nice again. If the British Army adopts the 7mm EM2 bullpup rifle and 7mm Taliban gun in the 1950s, how likely is at least one of these guns gets used by the RAF and RN? Probably, because they'll be available and they'll be cheap. In the nicest way, the RAF and RN tend to standardise on the same gun as the Army. You tend to, for logistical reasons. That's why they all have the SA-80. Not because it's not because it's a brilliant rifle, but because, and the recent versions aren't that bad, but because it's what they have, and so they all standardise on the same gun. They don't tend to go off and start going, oh, we're going to make this our order. Their orders of them aren't enough to justify making separate orders, so they tend to go on the same order. Colin Cameron, did this work? Right, I think it did. Enlarge your screen. I'm using the full-size screen on the side. If I enlarge this fully, then you can't see me. But, you know, I can... Let's duke that away. Put that up there. And hopefully that's easier for you to see. So that's basically what I've done, is I've just put a live version of it all. But I can take... I could... Settings. Display... Leave it as display. That's monitor capture. So let's see if I can do remove, add source, desktop capture. That one, and then you can see the questions. Hopefully, you can see the questions. Trying to zoom in a bit. Okay, so I have a question for you just displayed now. Hopefully you can see them. Malaga, can we expect a video at some point on many different types of ammunition used through the ages? If I take that down to there, and I put this up, and I go through this, I think you will see that there is... Let's see. We have what cannon is right for this ship coming up in the 1st of August. And I think there is theoretically an ammunition one at some point. At some point, there is one. See, Clarke, Alex, if we have a sensible situation before World War II and the fleet air arm is fully integrated onto carriers, how much displacement does this save on carrier compared to having the RAF? You're probably talking about... Honestly, once you're going in for it all, you're probably talking about a couple of 100 tons. Once you consider some of the different scenarios. And the things that work around differently. It's a really interesting scenario because I think if you'd had... Depends when the integration happens. The integration will need to happen in roughly 1930 for it to affect Ark Royal and Illustrious class designs. If it does happen in 1930, you might well be seeing a very different fleet air arm by 1939 than we do see historically. Because you've had a decade of integration of officers being completely integrated within the squad, in the force. So you would probably have had a lot of interesting work going on. Let's put it this way. I cannot stress how much of an impact that could have. But I think one of the things you might find, especially, is you would find things like the Rock probably wouldn't be involved and wouldn't be selected because it would be chosen. It would be pointed out. Hang on, we're unlikely to be dealing with heavy bombers. I think you might have found a torpedo bomber has been pushed at, a dive bomber has been pushed at earlier. So some of the problems with the skewer would probably be worked out. That'd be more of a pure dive bomber. And probably would be better. It might well be the second generation dive bomber, the skewer, by that point, or rather the equivalent of aircraft in service would be the second generation of dive bomber. I wouldn't be surprised. I think you would still be going for a long-range strike capability in terms of when the Swordfish is built in the successor, and night strike capability, but I also wouldn't be surprised if you have a canopy and maybe it's capable of going slightly faster. But stability and range are probably still going to be primacy of it. It's still going to be a long-range attack aircraft. And I also wouldn't be surprised. I think they might be a year ahead in their timeline of procuring a fighter, which means it may or may not have the Merlin 1000 horsepower engine, or it might have been. Again, the Royal Navy, considering how quickly they get basically control the Fleet Air Arm in 1930, well, officially 1937 Inskip report, and then the transfer basically is complete by 1939. Well, within that time, they make the order for the 2,000 horsepower engines. Because 1,000 horsepower don't work out, and they know they won't provide enough power for naval scenarios for the power to weight ratio for the aircraft to work, because naval aircraft are always going to have to be heavier. But the thing, because of the things they need to carry, and also because of the fact the controlled crash they do that is an aircraft landing on a carrier deck. So yeah, that's going to change some things. It would be interesting to see what that would change. I don't know, would the Hawker Henley really have been the British Stuka? I'm not sure I'd call it the British Stuka, but it's certainly got a potentiality in that direction. Did I say... Knight 684. While the Panzer Chief could not outrun battle cruisers, could the Constitution-style heavy frigates outrun the fourth rates or third rates? No, depends on the waters and the weather, and they couldn't always outrun them. No, because also whilst the third rates and fourth rates tended to have more sail, and third rates could be quite nippy when they wanted to be. Several of the third rates turned out to be very, very fast. So if it's a ship that's been on station for a long time and it's got a very fouled up hull, yeah, they could outrun it. If it's a ship which hasn't been on station for a long time, has a nice fresh copper bottom, and has a good crew and good sails, then no, it couldn't. Vision, did you see the indoor waterfall at Singapore Airport? The second time going through, I didn't have the time to go back and see it. The first time, because I was sent in one direction, I was planning to go see it, and then I ended up having to go in the other direction because it turned out I was on the other place. I took the little train route which I was going on. No, that's the pencil reflection, not a fly floating around. I took the train, and I thought it would take me and I would be able to get off, and I looked at it, but it didn't. So I got the wrong train, so I managed to miss it both times. But I'm hoping to get back there. I'm definitely going to go back there through Singapore on the way to Japan, because I don't think the direct flight from the UK to Japan is going to be financially viable. I don't think there is one. So I think the flight I'll be doing is the via Singapore one. Probably with Singapore Airlines, if I can pick anyone. Actually, given what we know about IJN I-168 and USS Scamp's flight, How likely is that IJN 168 was destroyed the same way as UH 864? Okay, you've given me numbers, and so this is from memory, because I'm not going to Google them and look them up that way, and I'm not going to not going to grab the books up there and start hunting through them, because it's not that time of day. So from memory, better than even chance. Good evening. What would the South American naval race look like if various nations got their independence at the same time as the US? You have to remember those nations were far better developed in some regards than the 13 colonies were. Even by this point, they had more infrastructure, they had more of an organization going on. So, especially Brazil, etc., they have some very interesting scenarios going on. I would go with... It would be just as competitive, but it might actually have built more of their own infrastructure because they have a longer time to start building up their own infrastructure. So goodness knows how big their infrastructure gets, because whilst they have some infrastructure at the time, they have more time to build up their own national industrial infrastructure, so they could actually be building a lot more of their own ships. They might not be able to build dreadnoughts themselves and the capital ships, but they could probably build their own cruisers and destroyers. Runon, applying the appropriate levels of handwavium. How much trouble could the 1800s Royal Navy get up to if it had World War II 60s era radio communications networks? So, if instead of relying on sending messages and people acting as independently, they could actually communicate directly with their subordinates and share information. Lord help the rest of the world. The Royal Navy would, you could imagine the inshore squadrons, etc., could be watching inshore, and the fleet could be basically anywhere in range. They wouldn't have to have visual range to communicate, and the command and control. Just imagine, at certain battles, let's put it this way. Let's talk about the glorious 1st of June. A certain admiral could get on the radio directly to HMS Caesar and go, "What the frigate are you doing? What in the name of all things holy are you doing?" Let's occur. Why didn't the British make the submarine ban an if we don't we walk issue? Okay, you have to remember the British are being performative on the submarine issue. The British want submarines. Consider this: who has the largest submarine fleet in the world in 1920s? Who has the largest submarine fleet in the world in the 1930s? Who has the largest submarine fleet in the world going into World War II? Just remember, sometimes people do things for performative reasons. The Royal Navy would love for submarines to have been banned. Unfortunately, that would have made a complete mockery of a lot of their defensive plans for, I don't know, the Far East, etc., where they planned to use submarines as alternative to minefields. And they had plans of ambush predating plans for the T-class to attack any Japanese vessels trying to get to Singapore before they reinforced. So yes, the Royal Navy would really love to have banned submarines. But as long as Britain made the claims over submarines it did, what was it able to keep clear? Remember the articles, the sloops we talked about, the 2,000 tons?
as long as the Royal Navy's able to make a big case over submarines, they're able to have it so that they can freely build, whenever they need, as many vessels under 2,000 tons that are only submarine warfare vessels as they want. And whilst we sort of go, well, 1939, they don't have these ships. If it had been 1942, think how many Flower class would have been in service by 1942. And probably their successors. The Royal Navy would have been able to turn the ocean grey with Flower class, and Black Swans, and Hunt class escort destroyers, all of which did not count under the treaty system. Yes, the Hunt class escort destroyers are technically fast enough, they do count, but it's an issue. But it's a doable issue. Hello, Jack Ray. Thank you for the 5 memberships. Melanie 1640, you dodged. Wade Eniat, hey, you got a membership. Felix B, you got a membership. Metcha Dussel, thank you. Amelia Barrow, yay. Christopher, yay. Oh, Tom, 10 memberships. Thank you, Jack Ray. Nice one. How do the world's powers react if in 1932 Geneva Conference bans heavy bomber aircraft, and how does that affect World War II and the Cold War if it stays in place? It doesn't stay in place. It dies very quickly. Because there is a small problem with trying to ban heavy bomber aircraft. Airliners. Transport aircraft. And we're not building a bomber, we're building a long-range maritime patrol aircraft. We're not building a heavy bomber, we're building a transport aircraft. We're not building a bomber, we're building an airliner. The moment they realised that structurally, at the time, there was no difference, you cannot ban it. Again, it's a performative thing. So yes, you could ban it, but suddenly, Britain and many other nations would suddenly gain the world's largest air transport command, with hundreds upon hundreds of large 4-engined, 2-engined aircraft which could move personnel all around the world. And then the moment war came, whoever was first to adopt it, first to go, oh yeah, we'll turn one of those into bombers, would unleash Armageddon, because it would suddenly free up all the big boys to do so. All the big nations would go, yay! Oh, all our transport aircraft are suddenly, we've had to, due to war contingencies, we've had to suddenly convert all these aircraft to bombers. Thank you, Steve Clarke, Emma Stons, Ken McGuire, all members. All Stafford's given members. Melanie, how the frigate do you keep dodging it? Christian Paulson. You know, it's Jack Ray. Unless he could specifically stick you out, there's nothing more he can do. He's trying to give everyone memberships. It's very kind of him. Thank you, Jack. Martina Henry. Leslie Mitchell, thank you. Peter Dawson, thank you. Daniel, cool. Alfred B228, hello. More. Manny Signal, wasn't the HE 111 an airliner with a suspiciously narrow Paris seating area? Yes. Miles Jenkins got a membership. Byron Newman has got a membership. JPT19 has got a membership. Sorrenti's End has got a membership. And Trent Telenko was given a membership. Just Vonk. Andrew Cruz, Hashimoto Kingo, Michael Patton, Donny Saltzman, Andy PWR. Again, I think it's managed to skip Melanie. Donaracana, we're not making a heavy bomber, we're making a precision supply dropping aircraft. Exactly. Mr. Vanguard, how much coal did the Scapa Flow fleet in World War I use per day? Thousands upon thousands of tons. The actual daily allowance every day, the amount, basically, there is a reason there is a non-stop supply of coal pretty much going up there, because every day they're using a lot, and I could give you a figure, but then you could go almost every single day and go it's a different figure. So it's thousands of tons.
tens of thousands of tons of coal pretty much being used every day, because you have the fleet that's sitting in Scarpa, you have the ships sitting in Scarpa that are using coal to sometimes power themselves and keep themselves going. You have, and power systems aboard. You have the ships that are using coal because they are manoeuvring around and going off to the firing range to do their firing exercises, which they do almost every day. You have the ships which are just manoeuvring around because they're being moved around the whole space. You have the ships which are just going out exercising as a squadron. There's a constant activity, a constant buzz of activity, and constant usage of coal. Jack Ray, Tuscashun. Hello! The squadron, it's a misnomer when we say the squadron and the fleets at anchor in Scarpa Flow, because they are never sitting still. There is not a single day when there's not a squadron exercising as a squadron and doing squadron maneuvers, so they are drilled. There's not a day when people aren't going to the fire range doing firing drill. That's one of the reasons why the ground fleet's accuracy in firing is so much greater than the battle cruiser forces fleets, because they have spaces to go and do it daily. But if you're maneuvering a ship from where it sits to where it goes and does its firing practice, that uses up coal. So whilst, yes, the vessels which are just using their coal to keep their engines going, to power their stuff, etc., during the day, and give people the heating and lighting, etc., they need, which you do need aboard a ship in Scarpa Flow for quite a lot of the year, because it gets cold quite quickly and it gets damp quite quickly if you don't, and you don't want damp powder, you don't want damp in the ship, so you want to keep a certain level of heat. All these things matter. They're using up some coal. Not a lot of coal, but some coal. But then once you have the ships manoeuvring around, that uses up a lot more coal. And then you realise just quite how many ships there are in that fleet, and how many of them are coal-fired. How many vessels wandering around. And then there's tender vessels, and there's the stuff ashore, etc., which is using coal. So there is a lot of coal being used every single day just as a baseline. Sam Richards, butterfly question. Would you have pulled Inglorious and Assisted in before the war to get more endurance in EG range plus AA? If I'd had the money, I would have converted them to proper single flight deck carriers. In that, I would have done the full conversion of getting rid of the bit which is the round down and sort of thing at the point where it is, and actually made it a level flight deck and sorted out those things. But I'd have also, extended the flight deck to go over the bow at the front and all those things. That would be me. And I would probably have altered them into some sort of scenario where they look not too dissimilar to Ark Royal Illustrious sort of style with their deck edge guns. But that would take money and time, and that would mean they weren't available for other things. It's just when do you do that? And range doesn't matter so much. Goodness gracious me, more memberships? You really are trying to get Melanie 1640, aren't you, Jack Ray? Potato Whisperer, Mega Scrows, get a membership. Thank you. Monica has a membership. Gregory Wake has a membership. Alex Hunt has a membership. Thomas van der Velde has a membership. Sean Brennan has a membership. Maud Mackenzie has a membership. New IQB 4002 has a membership. CA McDivitt has a membership. Ollie LL has a membership. Paul Bestwick has a membership. Timmy Locker has a membership. Yickers, Callan, Charles Curtis, RG, J. Bennett, Nathan Williams, Watson have a membership. Vintage Car History has a membership. Cool. VCH is still around. Are we live or live? Live or live? We are live and live. I'm not sure what is a live. Hello, Paul from Chicago. I basically have a questions section. So if you want to ask a question, it goes up on a separate screen, which can be displayed. And I also have the live chat. So I can watch both the live chat and the questions. Yeah. My kindness, if as your last Lexington class video at the start of the Pacific War found the USN with a third Lexington, would it have been better than Hornet or for Doolittle with longer flight deck, or worse due to refueling needs? It depends. If you're prepared to use an extra tanker to get her there, then she's probably fine. She's probably better. So if you're prepared to use a tanker, she's probably better. But remember, nicest way, if they had a third Lexington, they'd have also, under that scenario, I think they'd have also had 3 battlecruiser Lexingtons as well, which makes the Doolittle raid very interesting, because if you have a couple of battlecruiser Lexingtons along with the carriers, that then becomes a very convincingly scary group, and they are far less worried necessarily about Japanese interference, because, well, basically, you only have to worry at that point about Japanese capital ships turning up. Japanese heavy cruisers getting within range, they're going to get squashed. This is the point people often forget about. They look at those 16-inch Lexington-class battlecruisers and they go, well, they can't fight this battlecruiser, that battlecruiser. That's not their job. Their job is to squash Japanese cruisers. And they can do that. They are very good at squashing cruisers. They will squash cruisers quite convincingly all day, every day. How likely is it that had the RN kept the Maritime Patrol Aircraft and Coastal Command, that when the Sunderland Seafood came up for replacements, they'd be wary of putting all their eggs in a land-based MPA and get a flying boat? No, the British would get the Royal Navy would get a land-based Maritime Patrol Aircraft. The question is, would they get a Comet? Would they go for that sort of scenario, or Shackleton? Or would they might go for the Shackleton, I doubt they go for the Comet. I.e. to produce the Nimrod. I don't think the British would, the Royal Navy would do that. I think the Royal Navy would get them the Orion program. The Royal Navy would have no qualms about it. They're going for the Orion program. If Cunningham has an Admiral class carrier, Howe, which you want in the Med with her likely 18 full mile, 27 skewer and 36 swordfish, Illustrious and her 15 full mile, 18 swordfish, an Eagle, a 6 Sea Gladiator and 18 swordfish, after inevitably slaughtering the Italians at Taranto, I'm presuming there's a third question that's going to come onto that one. Just check it's not turned up elsewhere. Just looked up the ticket price of a Warsaw to Tokyo flight for June 2024. It's 3,435 PLN on June the 1st to 4,735 on PLN on the 28th. £1 is 5.25 PLN. Don't go much. Please. A price start 5,335 PLN. That's economy. We'll be going beginning of June. Basically, it's the month we go is decided by all our calendars, and June is the freest month of all of us in the year. So that's the month we can do a month of. So we'll be in Scandinavia next June. We'll be in Japan in June. Morning Bismarck, if she goes out, as an Admiral class will be deployed with her sister Hood and Prince of Wales. Where did the British send Admiral class CV Howe? Basically, if Taranto has happened and you've had that, and in nicest way, the difference is you're going to have had a rear admiral aircraft carriers earlier, if not a vice admiral aircraft earlier, if you have the Admiral class. Because you think, if you have an admiral class carrier, you cannot get around the sheer size and capability of the vessel means you're going to have an admiral of the carrier squadron. Okay, there is going to have to be an admiral for the carriers. So either it'll be a rear admiral aircraft carriers or it'll be a vice admiral aircraft carriers. I wouldn't be surprised if it's admiral class aircraft carriers. It's a vice admiral. I'm sorry, it's going to be a large enough, status enough ship that there's going to be a vice admiral aircraft carrier. So even if you do not have control of the fleet air arm, i.e., you have still the same scenario as as you had historically, You would have from quite early on, let's say 1924, 1925-ish, you would have a Vice Admiral aircraft carriers. That's going to have an impact. If you have got someone who is a 3-star, Vice Admiral, full Vice Admiral, who is, as part of their promotion, has been in charge of aircraft carriers for 2 years, there is going to be enough of them getting senior that by the time you get to World War II, you'll have had, let's say, if they've each done a 3-year post, right? So you'd have had, let's say, 1920. Let's go for 1924 to give us some time. You've got 2 before 1930. Then you've got 3 more before World War II, which means you've had 5 Vice Admirals. The odds of 5 Vice Admirals going through and not one of them ending up as an Admiral or more senior, very unlikely. So you've had all that knowledge built into Royal Navy carrier operations. You've had a Vice Admiral staff. You've had all that impact going on. You have massive differences in operations. You probably do not lose Glorious and Courageous the way you do. And if they're still built, if they're still part of it, or if you have 3 admirals instead of having Glorious and Courageous. If you have admirals wandering around, admiral class aircraft carriers wandering around, the Royal Navy has a very capable force. As you pointed out, it could well have 3 carriers in the Mediterranean. If they have 3 carriers in the Mediterranean fleet, then Eagle isn't in such perpetual demand, so she probably gets a maintenance done early, which means you have then all 3 carriers available for Taranto. If you have 3 carriers available for Taranto, then the sheer amount of aircraft turning up means that Gilio Cesare possibly survives, but in nicest way, everything else gets schnookered and is not really working, has at least been hit by 1 torpedo, if not 2. So everything else is going to need to be maintenance and fixed for months. In nicest way, if it would be an interesting issue. It would basically the British with those vessels. If Bismarck is out, then in nicest way, if you have a carrier with both task forces, then she's getting engaged the whole time by strike aircraft, which is going to affect her operation. As it was seen, in nicest way, it's going to affect her operation and capability to manoeuvre. There's definitely no chance of chasing Prince of Wales, but also that's going to change the engagement. It's going to change the information available. She's probably going to be monitored from the air the whole time for quite a while, so it's going to change the whole engagement of the Denmark Straits, because again, you're probably going to have aircraft up and spotting. So if you have aircraft up and spotting for the British guns, that's going to make them more accurate. Most of the time, the odds are it's going to make them more accurate. And at longer range, which is going to have an impact on the Bismarck. More shells hit equals more damage. More damage equals more shells hitting equals more greater damage. The more damage you do, the more likely you are to damage something important. The more chance you damage something important, the more likely you do that. The more likely that ship's operating and fighting efficiencies are detrimentally affected. That's the scenario you're talking about. Basically, those things have a massive ongoing impact. So, Steve Clarke, if we had a time machine which allowed you to observe the past, which person and place in history would you eavesdrop on to get a better understanding of any decision? That's an evil question to ask. But I probably would like to go back and sort out what actually happened to Glorious. Because now, let's put it this way, we have 2 scenarios. You have the captain charging back, which has always been his official line. Various other stuff came out as cover during wartime, but they were stupid. But escorted with 2 destroyers. You also now have this person putting forward a theory that they were off on a secret mission, being escorted by 2 destroyers. That's even more stupid and even more against doctrine, okay? You basically have a choice, either way, you have a scenario of it shouldn't have been out there escorted just by 2 destroyers. That's completely against British doctrine. Courageous has more ships around her doing that when she's doing anti-submarine warfare operations. She has more of a flotilla around. She has a flotilla around her, and yeah, they still get through. But she has those ships around her. So, yeah. It's just wrong. I'd like to find out that one, I think. Colin Cameron. No, I missed Dunrick Hammer's one. Dunrick Cameron. Ignoring if it would never happen, what would losing the Orkneys do to the British easy? Not as much as sometimes marked out, but certainly would make it very, very complicated. Sometimes people say, I saw someone say that the other day it would cost British for Britain 50% of its exclusive economic zone to lose the Orkneys. No, it wouldn't be 50% of the easy. Not at all. But it would make things very, very complicated. And frankly, it'll make things complicated for the Orkneys, because I'm not sure they get a better deal anywhere else. It's like one of those scenarios where people go, oh, yes, well, they want to move. Well, does anyone else want to take them? It's like there are sort of issues going on now with certain parts of the world. Here's fun. Colin, if your transport fleet supposition goes ahead and the UK ends up something like the Blackburn Beverley Livens or one of its cohorts, would have developed FAE bomb early? Potentially, but probably they'd have just developed aircraft which could be rapidly reconfigured. I mean, amazingly rapidly reconfigured. I mean, it's kind of like the fuel tanks on British carriers, which are honestly ballast tanks right up until someone goes, oh, it's wartime. Oh, crew, pipe in. Ah, we've now got extra fuel bunkage. It's amazing. Clean out the system to make sure there's no salt water and water in there. Problem out properly. Yeah, and put in fuel. Oh, it works amazingly. Great. What do you think happened to the court-martial system during World War I? So many things happened that would cause a court-martial in Prague Wars or World War II that have no court-martial in World War I. Basically, in the Royal Navy in World War I, there are issues. Okay, there are issues. That's a fleet in transition. That is a navy in transition, but from point A to point B. It's moving from a Victorian navy to a which really didn't like to have court-martials, to the navy of World War II. And it's still in transition in World War I, and that is one of the issues. Stephen Richards. Glorious survived and Rachel Manor. Is she suitable for Pacific operations? Yeah, the British can use her for Pacific operations. Nice way. The thing about where the British would be using her for Pacific operations. Okay? This is one of the interesting things topics on hand for people. People go, well, Pacific operations. They always think of them as American-style Pacific operations coming from Pearl Harbor and going across. So this is for me. I.e., working from the Eastern Pacific to the Western Pacific. The British aren't going to do that. The British are working from the south up. The British plan is Singapore, South China Sea, up that way. The British plan is Australia. The British is south up, which is a different perspective. You're not working across the Pacific, you're working up the Pacific, or rather up the Western Pacific. And for that, Glorious is fine. It's one of those things. People get very caught up in refighting the Pacific War and trying to slot fleets into it. And you sit there and go, the fleets are going to build the ships with the balances they need for the scenarios they think they're going to face. And for the British, do not expect to ever be fighting a war where they're fighting from east to west across the Pacific. That's not on high on British scenarios. If they do, they think they're going to need to have a load of fast tankers, which they are planning on building. They're part of the 1940 build schedule, a load of fast tankers. Ronan, if you could have any documentation, set of documentation or transcript of heretofore unrecorded conversation, which would you like to have? I'd like to find the documentation. I think I was talking about this in Ark Royal. I would like to find the documentation and the conversations around about HMS Howe and what happened to her. I would like to know why exactly Camel Lairds are considered what they are when they don't build an aircraft carrier. I haven't built an aircraft carrier. As said, the only vessel which fits is Howe. The only vessel which fits the criteria is Howe. So I would like to have that.
We're going to Tokyo's 2025. I should point out. 2024 is going to be Scandinavia. We basically decided we needed to do a close one to the UK next year for other reasons because there's something else Chipshape wants to do next year. And basically, I think our theory is we're going to end up doing a biannual thing as well. So that will mean we'll probably try and do. It'll be a shorter one in the same. It'll be a shorter distance one in the years when we are doing that thing, and it'll be a longer distance one in the years when we're not doing that thing. But that's all plans we've got to discuss next week. I don't know, if the RFC didn't merge with the Royal Naval Air Service, how is World War II affected if the Army Air Corps had taken on the role that historically the RAF did, and how does it affect the RN? Well, it means it basically means the Royal Navy and the Royal Navy keeps their own fleet, their own air service. So, long range maritime patrol and all those things will be Royal Navy. So they'll have built their own maritime patrol aircraft and have that, and they'll have had complete aircraft integration from the get-go. So expect that to have had an impact on their carrier design, their aircraft design, everything. In terms of the army, that could be interesting, but yeah, you might have more. An interesting thing, you might actually have a stronger fighter command, and probably would have an integrated air support command, and it might have been an interesting debate within the British Army over artillery versus aircraft. That could have been interesting, a whole debate in the British Army over light aircraft versus artillery. The British Army could be very, very keen on dive bombing at the end of World War One. So, honestly, you could see the British Army might have replaced their light artillery regiments in terms of their rapid maneuver formations. The light artillery would be re-rolled as heavy artillery, and they'd be using aircraft for the light artillery role for their armoured cavalry formations. I think that could be kind of an interesting scenario, i.e. Blitzkrieg style, or, as I tend to call it, British General style. If the treaties get a pound-for-pound conversion of capital ships into keel-up carrier designs in 1956, what does the run-up and actual conflict World War II look like? The treaty needed to get a pound-for-pound conversion of capital ships into keel-up carrier designs in 1936. So basically, all the ships they're building from 1936 onwards, then our capital ships get converted to carriers. Well, the trouble is, the German Navy isn't a treaty navy, neither is the Italians are, though. So the Italians end up with carriers, which is going to be interesting, but no Littorio class, basically, because the Littorios... let's see, they enter service, they're built from 1934 onwards, but they don't enter service. They are all launched in 1937, 1940, so they would all be converted to aircraft carriers. So the Italians don't have the Littorios, because they're signatories. The French don't have the Dunkirks, they have aircraft carriers. The British don't have the King George V's, because they're aircraft carriers. So Prince of Wales and King George V will be ready by the time war begins, so they have two of those carriers. Two more carriers in that scenario. The Americans would be very interesting. Yamato Musashi would be massive carriers. Would certainly change it would certainly change some scenarios like Pearl Harbor, because it could be a lot more aircraft involved from the get-go. It would change Taranto, because there could be a lot more aircraft involved from the get-go. The Battle of Denmark Straits would be interesting. There could be carrier battles in the Mediterranean. That could be interesting. Or there again, the carriers could be caught in harbour. Which would be very, very interesting if the carriers were caught in harbour at Taranto. Ooh, that could be an interesting scenario. Carriers caught in harbour, Taranto. Because they would be different than a battle. Oh, some of the bombers might actually do damage to those if they're the Italians. It depends what style of ship they built. If they build it like they were planning on building it, it's going to not be that good. Oh, that could be. Oh, that. Basically, it changes a lot. That'd be a whole video to work through that one. The run-up looks far more carrier competitive. People are probably going to obsess far more about the carrier aircraft. So I doubt the Gullwing Spitfire, aka the Seafire original version of Supermarine, gets cancelled. There would be a lot more interesting entries. It probably moves. I don't think it moves the start date of the European wars because that's European war because that's a land war condition, but the Pacific War potentially because they might want to wait till Yamato and Musashi are ready, but that's again a decision made by fuel allowances. D'Ange, would more galleys have saved the Spanish Armada? Certainly would have made their lives slightly easier dealing with fire ships, so they might not have needed the scramble so much. But there again, they need to have been taking a lot more galleys around the Atlantic coast, and that's not a good fun time for anyone. If the RM was in charge of the Maritime Patrol airplane and the ASF, aka Shackleton replacement, the UK government make the RN take UK plan, would they have made it clear a jet is what they want at the start? I have no idea. That's so many what ifs. You're now off into fiction. That's the trouble. You have to take, as I always say, in alternate history. What you have to be very, very careful if you want to produce an accurate answer. You have to know. You've got first the Royal Navy in control of the Maritime Patrol program. They're looking for a Shackleton replacement, so they've gone with the Shackleton. Okay, which they probably would have. And then you've got the UK government insisting they take a UK plane. Okay. So yes, would they have made it clear they wanted a jet from the start? Probably not. They'd have probably gone, in the nicest way, what do we want? They'd have gone, we want a long-range aircraft, which can carry a heavy load. That's our primary requirement. What will industry offer? They'd have probably put it out to tender and seen what industry came back with, rather than going, we want a jet or we want anything. They'd have gone and see what industry would produce. Because that tends to be how the Royal Navy that period works. But I can't be 100% sure because it's gone a lot off the line. Clarke, can you tell us if any nation has created a thermobaric anti-ship missile? Now, let's put it this way. I don't know, and I wouldn't like to say suspicions, but I will say that quite a lot of nations have toyed with warheads which could conceivably be fitted to their anti-shipping missiles. So that's, But there again, using a thermobaric warhead on a warship may or may not be sensible. There are issues with its employment, so it's going to depend on how you're using it, how you're employing it. The thermobaric sounds a very cool weapon up until you start using it. It's very, very cool in certain areas. It's cool as in devastating. It's not necessarily so good in others. Harold Wilson could be as bitter over Skybolt as he liked, but yeah, the British government might try and claim they'd stop him, but they wouldn't have done. He wants to buy British, that's fine, but the RN could still have combined the Americans, and Skybolt did not fundamentally undermine the British nuclear program. It caused issues, but that wasn't the really problem with Skybolt. There are many other issues with Skybolt. They'd probably go with something They'd probably go with the most reliable aircraft they could get.
They'd see what the industry would offer. See, Richard, is it easier to have questions and chat separate? Take care, Carmen. Go. It is useful in a way because it means that I don't get just going to sound strange. It's not I don't get distracted by the chat, but it means I find it easier to concentrate on the questions and not find the chat quite so intriguing. When are the files? When are the files on Inglorious declassified? A long, long time away, if they still exist. Colin Cameron, hire a big caravan to European trips. No. No. That sounds like a clever idea until you realise some of the distance involved and the roads involved. It's like we looked at it for Scandinavia and we then went, no. Absolutely no. Because whilst there are 4 of us and we could drive it, it's almost more sensible to do train and ferry. And in fact, I'm going to suggest to the team that maybe we do a kind of race in that some of us go by train and some of us go by plane and see who gets there first and who's in the better condition. Honestly, Knight 6831, you have gone into very far into RAF engineering history, and that's not my area of expertise. I have done a bit on that, and I know a bit of that, and I have books which I could go and look for that, but I wouldn't like to answer that question off memory. No treaties. Aircraft carriers come along a bit slower. They probably would do to an extent a little bit slower. How big could battleships if infrastructure is in place? Oh, I think in the nicest way, Yamato and Musashi are not actually as big as they can get. I think you could be talking 100,000 ton plus vessels easily. It's very easy to get up there. If you consider how quickly they went from 20,000 tons to 40,000 tons. You're talking in the space of 15 years. You've gone to 40,000 tons. You've doubled. I could see you doubling again in another 15 years to 80,000 tons. Very easily get to 100,000 tons. Very, very easily. Take care, Matches Dostal. Tempting to do a bit of a race. It's tempting. Nice one. Would it be right to assume that even without the Korean War, the Forrestal class would have been built because of the increasing size of jet aircraft? Yes. Yeah. Right, I'm going to say 3 minutes more, and then I'm going to go and start Discord chat for a bit. So chat on people on Discord for about half an hour, 45 minutes. Because I like the idea of being able to do a 2-way chat. But I hope you enjoyed the questions. I will try. I think I will try and do this for the question sections of brew ships from now on, if you like this. Because then again, I can differentiate and I can put the questions up on the chat on here so people can see it. I wonder if I can. No. Oh. I can make it smaller so I can have more of the screen for pictures if I do that. Okay. That's useful. Thank you, Monica. I'm doing the Iberian Peninsula by motorbike and tent next year, but alone, so I won't have to put up with anyone else snoring. Very sensible. How reasonable is it that the Italians built 6 light cruisers acts as fast scouts and escorts for the Francisco Caracola class fighter battleships? Oh, they would have done. They'd have built something. The nicest way, the Italians would never let those ships go out without some form of escort. Night, Dan Freeman. Yeah, about 2 minutes. So it'll be roughly 11 o'clock my time. And then I'll be gone for 5 minutes before I start Discord. Thanks, Algeciras. I like this Q&A section. Thank you, Stephen Richards. Right, I'm going to shut down the questions. Da-da-da. Ending Q&A now. It removes all the questions in the question list. Detail on sorry. Another Armada question. Armada versus Indian War Japanese invasion fleet. Fighting for the Philippines. Yeah, probably the Armada, but that's mainly just because, in the nicest way, their ships are just slightly have slightly more have cannon on them. But seriously, if the Japanese get close, their archers are going to be a nightmare to deal with. Washington Night Turn. Do any of the clauses of the Washington Naval Treaty stop the British Empire from building 2 new 27 to 29,000 ton 10 14-inch armed armored tall super for Chile? Yes. Or rather, they mean they have to, and they don't really stop them, they mean they have to give everyone the details for them. They can, they can build them for them. The Americans won't like them building them for them, but they can build them for them, but they just have to tell them or give them all detail. Anyway, I'm going to end the Q&A now, he says. Toodles. Yay! That's gone to the live chat. That's gone to the live... Hello, there you go. It's gone to the live chat, which is massive, and I've had out here doing lots of things. But I'm just going to remove that. Thank you, everyone. They need to build them in Spain. Potentially. Probably the British would find a way to build them for them, but somewhere else. Thank you, Colin Cameron. Thank you, Joss Funk. Thank you, Ian Morrison. Thank you, Clarke. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a nice evening. And as said, I will be on Discord chat in about a few minutes. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking part. Thank you, Melanie6040, Paul from Chicago, Jack Ray, Dan Freeman, and all the others who've been adminning this evening. Thank you. Not sure why it's gone from that to live chat. Thank you, everyone, and take care. Toodles. And let's see what we've got coming up. Next week, you'll find a link down below to them. We have to the Patreon vote. We have Patreon 80. Brew ships 116 on Sunday. And also next week we have Sphere of Influence. Theodore Roosevelt's desire for naval diplomacy. Always good, always fun to learn. So a load of questions for something. I'm looking forward to it. Night 6 one. I am indeed. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Have fun. And as I said, I'll be on Discord in a few minutes.